Welcome back, everybody. Man, hell of a week. Just finished up my first hunting trip of the season in Utah. There were some miles put on the feet. There were some elevation lost and gained. It was a good week. Got a killer bull, recovering. Another hunting trip coming up in a few weeks. But again, let's get into this podcast, shall we? We're going to go straight to Black Rifle Coffee's website because you know that they are the ones who sponsor the podcast. Something cool here, they have a Gothic Serpent roast. For those of you unfamiliar with Gothic Serpent, you may have heard of the movie Black Hawk Down. That is the actual operation. Not Black Hawk Down, that was the movie. Gothic Serpent was the operation associated with that. So it says it right here. Gothic Serpent honors the U.S. Delta Force and Army Rangers who fought in the Battle of Mogadishu. This Sumatran roast tastes like rich dark chocolate, cherry, and citrus, topped off with a chocolatey aroma. You can sign up to get notified when the ECS drops. It's got a countdown timer going on right there. Let's see what else we got going on. Buy 2 coffees, get a free gift. I mean, that's pretty sweet. National Coffee Day. I have no idea what day that is. I already covered pretty in-depth, the website. This slider here can take you through the roasts. And, I talked about hunting and getting ready and the things you could use, whether it's in the bundles, samples, or the gear section. I'd start thinking about holiday season as well. That's right around the corner, and that's where I'd start pointing you. Because right now, hunting season is ongoing. So grab some stuff if you need it, but you might be a little bit too late as well, depending on where you are in the world and the season. All right, my guest today, his name is Chris Skates, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph that he wrote me. First off, the subject matter of the email was survival of the world's most deadly cancer. Former coal plant worker for 30 years who dreamt of becoming a writer. Kept journals of short stories in the 80s. Finally had the courage to submit a story about his relationship with his father in 2000, since published a neighborhood of 200 stories, articles, and columns. Managed to write his way out of the coal plant to a gubernatorial appointment as an advisor and speechwriter. He talks about that, and a presidential appointment where he eventually wrote a speech and a tweet for President Donald Trump. Collapsed on the sidewalk in D.C. in 2020, obviously due to his cancer. This man is fascinating. His background, his work in the energy sector, and his work in politics. So I'm going to shut up. Episode 354 with Mr. Chris Skates. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke.
Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. Get cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
I don't even know what to do with that. Mr. Skates, welcome to...
Thank you.
There you go. I have no idea how these things start and how they begin. Power plant chemist.
Yes.
Let's start there.
Okay, sure.
How does one find themselves working it? I think I understand what a power plant is, and I think I understand what the chemist is. Nuclear? Coal?
Yeah. I did nuclear and coal.
Okay. What's the role?
What you're really focused on is when you're at a utility boiler, utility turbine, the temperature and pressure of the steam you're creating, if you have the least bit of impurities in that steam, it's like ball bearings hitting the turbine.
Okay, that makes sense.
The turbine is a multi-million-dollar asset. So your job as a chemist is to protect the asset at all costs. The other thing is dissolved oxygen is a bad guy, and pH. So you need to keep the pH in a very narrow region. And it's not just, even that's not quite as easy as it sounds, because it's not just the pH when the water is water, it's when it's steam at 1,000 degrees, 2,000 psi. So you need to shoot for a pH target down here so you can hit a different target up here at 1,000 degrees. Damn. So you're trying to keep the steam chemistry pure.
Okay.
That's your main thing, to make pure steam for the turbine.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding, so when you're talking about a turbine, this makes sense to me because I've flown turbine aircraft, so I understand how they work. Whether it's coal or nuclear, at the end of the day, that's just the mechanism that's getting the turbine to spin.
Correct.
Okay. So if it's coal versus nuclear, are you still just paying attention to the water and managing those things?
Yes, it's just a different heating source.
Okay.
But for me, it's all what the chemistry parameters are. And they aren't the same. because the higher the temperature and pressure, the more stringent the chemistry parameters have to be, the more pure the steam has to be. So it was a little bit easier when I was doing coal plants because lower pressure, lower steam.
Okay.
But I also was very interested in the coal chemistry because that was how we paid our bills. So if I pay you for 8,800 BTU coal and you send me 8,750 BTU coal, you just stole from me.
That makes sense.
So I was analyzing the coal. I was also analyzing coal purity because not only can you have problems inside the boiler if the steam in boiler water is not pure, you can have problems on what we call the fire side if the coal is not the chemistry we need it to be. And the boilers are designed to burn a specific coal. So you can't just throw any old coal in there.
I feel like your test kit is a little bit more complicated than the one I have for my hot tub.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I test for pH also.
Yeah, we had a full laboratory. We were checking stuff with atomic absorption, a graphite furnace, ion chromatograph. And I had 4 or 5 lab techs that reported to me. So,
how did you find your way into this line of work?
It was crazy. I wasn't looking for it. You and I were talking right before the show. Several teachers encouraged me to be a writer. I loved writing. Didn't think I could make a living. My mindset was I'm going to get a job at a small town newspaper making $10,000 a year. So I want to make some better money than that. Chemistry. Everybody needs chemists. So I majored in chemistry. And Georgia Power came recruiting at University of Georgia, the Harvard of the South, where I was a student. And they were looking for guys to be lab technicians, not full chemists yet, at their nuclear plant. And not many people wanted to work there because it was in the middle of nowhere, Georgia. And you worked a 7-day swing, which was a brutal shift. You switched from days to evenings to midnights every week. So three times a week you changed schedules.
3 times a week or 3 times a month?
3 times a week.
Oh, that's horrible.
You worked all 3 shifts every week. And then you only had 48. You didn't have a weekend off. You only had 48 hours off.
That is a recipe for blowing your brains out.
Yeah. And by the way, that was a creation of more of the union than of the company.
What was their reasoning for that?
You were relieving all the guys that were on their off days. So when anybody was off, you came in and worked their shift.
I feel like there's a better way to do that without destroying people.
Yeah. They, a long time after I left, they did come up with a 12-hour shift, which is much better for everybody.
Yeah.
But the union fought it tooth, nail, and claw. But anyway, they were recruiting. The pay was the best I had found of any job I had looked at, which at the time, 1985, was $19,000 a year. I was like, yes, big money. And so I applied, got hired, went through all the nuclear, restrictions, classified stuff. You probably did way more than I did, but
I don't have any knowledge of. I know what nuclear bombs are, and I know how to get on a radio and call an EOD technician. I don't want anything to do with that shit.
Yeah. So I went through all the training and got certified as a lab technician at a nuclear power plant. Next thing I know, I'm at midnights. I'm actually working on a memoir, and one of the most seminal moments in my life was at 24 years old, full radiation suit like you see in the movies, breathing through a respirator, looking down into the core of a nuclear reactor because I hired in right when they were doing a refueling outage. They had the lid off that puppy, and I could look down into the core. It was flooded with water.
Is that where they put the rods?
Yeah, and they were changing out rods, and I was sent up there to take a sample. And I'd only been out of college 6 months, and I was like, how the heck did I get here? And
that's some sci-fi shit.
Yeah. And I actually think, I could never prove this, but I think that's how I got leukemia. They sent me, because I was the new guy, they sent me down this tunnel night after night, maybe 4 or 5 times a night, to get a reactor gas sample. I had to put on the radiation suit, belly crawl down this tunnel, open a port that was about 2 inches in diameter, and there was a probe that stayed there all the time. It seems like it was about 10 or 12 feet long, and it went up in a vertical tunnel. You moved it over, put a little glass vial on the bottom, and pushed it down onto a needle at the very top of the reactor. You're just laying on your belly on top of the reactor. And you puncture that vacuum tube. It pulls in some reactor gas. You pull it out. When you're coming out of the tunnel, you've got this thing right up against the trunk of your body. It's in a plastic Ziploc bag. I mean, it's not high tech. And they kept sending me in there over and over. So I had the highest radiation dose in the plant for the year that I was there. And 30 years later, I ended up with the most rare and deadly form of leukemia in the world. And my oncologist thinks that's how I got it.
For anybody who may not know this, I'm not an expert in anything nuclear or power plants. I am listening to the description of what your job was, and I'm going to assume that a nuclear power plant is a very complex, very high-tech, very high-speed installation.
Yes.
What you just described is the most low-tech way that I am aware of to retrieve a sample. I feel like the engineers that built the power plant could have somehow figured out a way to do that autonomously.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm actually a huge proponent of nuclear power now. I've had a lot more experience, and there's so many really exciting new reactor designs that are intrinsically much safer. But yeah, at first we were kind of spitballing. Not just us, the Russians.
I don't feel like when you're talking about nuclear energy, you should pair the word spitballing.
Yeah. Every reactor, when you think about the 3 Mile Island era, and I was at Plant E.I. Hatch in South Georgia, Vogel, every reactor was a little bit different. Westinghouse and GE were the two primary manufacturers, and they're like, okay, that was okay, but maybe we could make it better over here if we did this. Ooh. So they were redesigning the reactors over and over and over as we learned.
Yeah.
It was such new technology. So you almost had to have a dedicated crew of people at each plant that knew that plant. I mean, the basics were the same, but some of the detail stuff was different. And that was one of the first generation nuclear power plants. So it had some antiquated, weird stuff.
What year did Chernobyl cook off?
It's so crazy. My mom was really scared for me to go to work in a nuclear power plant in '86. And Chernobyl happened, 3 Mile Island happened almost immediately, a month after I hired on. And then Chernobyl happened, I think, about the next year or two. I think 87, 88.
So what happened there? Because that was a nuclear facility, correct?
Yeah. They were doing a lot of things that most people that are laypersons wouldn't know that were very high risk, that the American nuclear industry would have never tried.
Well, I feel like they have a tunnel similar to the one that you did, but I'm fascinated to know what else would be considered high risk.
Well, like things like, let's talk about what I'm an expert in, water chemistry. They were using air to treat their water. Air also has CO2. It has a lot of things in it you don't want in it. We were using purified oxygen.
They were like pushing air through the water, you mean?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
And so using air is really, we would have considered that way too risky because you were bringing in impurities. It's just some of their operating practices. They were a little cavalier. If you watch the miniseries Chernobyl, have you seen that?
No,
pretty powerful.
I'm going to probably within the next 48 hours.
One of the lead operator, that they were doing a test, and he was like, the main operator, the guy that actually turns the valves and the switches, he was saying, I don't think we're supposed to do it this way. And he's like, God, I'm the boss. And I had some of that when I was at nuclear too. You do the way I tell you to do it. And he ended up blowing the friggin' thing up. So really it was operator error on a massive scale, arrogance, a cavalier attitude towards a test that they only did periodically. He really didn't need to do that test on midnights. It was a midnight shift when it happened. It should have been on days when you had the full staff there and multiple boxes checked, and probably what you did in the military where you have people repeat back to you. And
the positive control checklist? Yeah. You say one thing, you repeat it, and then oftentimes there's a third command.
Right.
Or not a command, but a repetition that it has in fact been done.
Chernobyl had guys that were half asleep. So they created, if I'm remembering it right, it's been a long time since I've studied it, they created a steam explosion. That,
like pressure, essentially.
Yeah, disfigured the reactor and opened the reactor up. And then the reactor itself, the fuel itself, caught on fire. Not good.
The rods caught on fire?
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus, I didn't even... Well, I guess, yeah, because you're having a nuclear reactor. But they're in the water on fire?
Well, the water, when the steam blew, then you lost your water cooling. And it overheated.
So...
It was very close to doing the China syndrome thing where it melts down into the earth.
China syndrome thing. Yeah. Tell me more. I've never heard of this.
The China syndrome movie happened. It came out like a month or two before 3 Mile Island really happened. And it's not terribly far away from what happened with 3 Mile Island.
Well, what happened in 3 Mile Island?
There they had a bad indication, a bad gauge, that said they were flooding the reactor. And so there, the shift supervisor did follow procedure. He said, pump some of that water out of there. And he turned some auxiliary pumps on to get the level lower. You didn't want to flood the reactor. And the indication was stuck. Back then, we all used, I lived this world, these little needles that moved up and down a gauge. Nothing was computer. And the needle was stuck. So
you're talking about like a glass almost vacuum sealed. Maybe there's fluid in it and it's just moving up and down.
I bet it did have some kind of a gel in it to keep it, not from bouncing around, but it was a little arrow and then a numerical gauge, and it just slid up and down vertically. And it was stuck. So he's pumping water out.
Did anybody give it the old tap? Because that's always my first move.
After a few minutes. Yeah, after a few minutes, but they had already pumped water out.
Which meant the rods were probably exposed.
Then the rods got hot, and it didn't disfigure to anywhere near the point that Chernobyl did, but it disfigured enough that you got a pretty good radiation leak.
Okay, so you're in Chernobyl. What type of radius are we talking about where that thing deforms, where the people are instantly fucked?
Oh, man, I think it was like 35, 40 miles. And people were affected for like hundreds of miles.
And it's just as soon as that thing cracks and they're exposed, that radiation is just radiating?
Right. There were some real heroes that went in to remove material that was radioactive, and they would run in and work for 5 minutes. That was the maximum exposure they could take. Almost all those guys died.
I was going to say, I feel like their life expectancy was about 27.
Some of the helicopter pilots that flew fire retardant over the reactor died within days.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
And then the half-life, what were they using in there? Uranium?
So what am I complaining about? It took me 30 years to get cancer. So.
Well, I don't know. This is a very glass half full approach for sure. I feel like there's probably some better solutions. What's the half-life on the fuel that was being used there? At what point was Chernobyl, can people approach that safely?
It's in the 3 digits, hundreds of years.
Okay.
You know what they did, don't you, to mitigate it? All they did was built a big vault around it. And then that vault started leaking a few years ago, and now they built another
concrete vault?
One. Yeah.
How did they do that without exposing people to the risk?
Well, I think they did expose people.
That sounds very Russian.
Yeah. So they built the one. It leaked a little bit, so now it's a double wall. It's just sitting there. That sucker's still cooking inside there.
I feel like you should always use a double wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know the design on what they put up, but they've now built a second one that's even bigger. So it looks like a football stadium over the top of a reactor.
God, I'm just trying to think, could you do that remotely without exposing people?
Yeah.
I feel like the Russian approach to that would be...
We can get another worker.
Well, you go to the prisons and you say, you're on a life sentence.
Yeah.
Or you can work the next month.
Yeah.
You're now a construction contractor. And if you live, a concrete contractor, and if you live, maybe we'll let you out.
I have a friend who worked at a plant in China. And the week that he was there, they fed all the employees. They had a meal for everybody, and really a party atmosphere. And my friend, I won't say who he worked for. You would know the company. He said, "What are we celebrating?" And he said, "No fatalities this week." And he said there were literally hundreds of people lined up at the gate wanting a job.
Oh, man.
So I worked with some Chinese guys, some Chinese engineers. Safety is so far from their mindset.
How is that possible given what it is they're doing?
I don't know. People just are expendable to them. In my particular example, they were working under my supervision, and they had a 150-pound gas cylinder that they were using up on the boiler to do some tests. Well, our OSHA regulations say if you've got a gas cylinder, you have to have it tied down and a valve cover screwed onto the top.
I'm assuming this means flammable gas.
Yeah, flammable gas, but any compressed gas, if that tips over and that valve breaks, it's like a missile.
Yeah, it's like a scuba tank. Same thing. We always have to lay them down. We always positive control, and we're just talking about compressed air.
Right. So they had a gas cylinder, and we're up on the boiler. There's a little vibration anyway, and it's just sitting there. Valve is naked, and I said, "Hey, you got to get this tied down and get a valve cap on it right away." And they're like, "Why?" And I said, "Because if it falls, it's extremely hazardous." And they were like, "So?" I mean, it blew their minds that I cared. God. If it breaks this guy's legs, we'll just go get another guy.
So when there are
And it may be better now. That was 25 years ago.
Also, let's leave room for maybe not. Okay, so in the world of nuclear reactors, in that energy space, how open are, let's say, Chernobyl or 3 Mile? Is that information spread widely about what happened so other people can learn from this? Because obviously, sure, it's a power plant in China. Maybe people in the U.S. would say, what's the big deal? Well, I mean, there's some pretty cascading consequences that can radiate, no pun intended, well outside of the distance of the actual facility.
3 Mile Island, there have been volumes written on.
Okay.
Chernobyl, they're still hiding some of that.
Are those two kind of the worst examples of things gone wrong with nuclear power?
Yeah, even Fukushima, when you really look at it, they built that in a really bad spot.
Yeah.
Because of the
it's
tsunami.
On a fault line, right?
Yeah, and there was a tsunami. But the plant was designed well and ran well. And they did contain that relatively quickly. Yes, the radiation got out, and I'm not saying it was nothing, but in the grand scheme of things, it was not that bad. And you look at the number of hours that these nuclear plants in America have run safely.
Yeah.
When we get some of these new ones built, that's the way to go.
What happened at Fukushima? I know that there was a tsunami, but how did that interact with the facility?
I really don't know much about it. I know it shorted out some pumps that salt water.
Yeah.
And shorted out some of the controls so they couldn't move water around the reactor, but it didn't overheat. They had some emergency equipment and got it
contained.
But even fossil plants, I worked in coal plants a lot longer. There you're dealing with 3,500 PSI steam. There's so many bad things that can happen that almost never do. But I've been in some life-threatening situations myself with just fossil energy where steam's involved. You know how we look for a steam leak on a 3,500 PSI boiler?
No.
We take a broom handle and we tie a red rag to the end.
Stop it. Again, you're about to describe the most low-tech solution to some of the most high-tech shit ever.
Yeah.
So a broom and a red rag.
Yes.
Okay, tell me more.
And the steam is hissing so loud it's deafening. So it's leaking, but steam at 3,500 PSI is invisible. So you take the broom handle and you wave it around, and when the broom handle gets cut in half, you're like, oh, there it is. Now, they're probably, again, I've been around a long time, so this is some of the older stuff I did back in the 80s. There may be sonic guns and things like that to detect it now. But
I mean, listen, the 80s was a while ago, but I still feel like we can be better than the broom.
Yeah. I never had to be the guy holding the broom.
So if somebody did, you would obviously know it was leaking because of the noise, but if you were not aware of that, it would have cut you in half.
Yeah.
Holy
I'll tell you
shit.
one I know of. I can't mention these plants. I don't want to get sued, but 880 megawatt drum unit. So at the top on drum units, there's a giant steel drum on the top.
Okay.
Like 2.5-inch thick steel walls. They drained the boiler, took it offline. They were going to do some maintenance. So this boiler probably held 55,000 gallons of water in these thousands of these tubes. So one of the workmen, part of the procedure says you take these two massive 3-inch bolts off the door and you push the door in and let that ventilate and let the boiler cool because I had to go in the drum every time there was an outage and inspect the drum. You crawl through them like a tunnel. And so this guy was going to open the door wouldn't open. Well, someone had forgotten the step to open the vents on the top of the roof of the boiler. Boiler's 400 feet tall. So the whole thing was under vacuum.
I was going to say it was, compressed.
This guy chinned himself up on a handle that's above the door and kicked the door open. It sucked him in. He came crawling out a few minutes later with no clothes on, his pelvis and both his femurs broken. Luckily, he wasn't killed because there ain't nothing soft inside a boiler drum. It's all steel.
Okay. That's a real tough fucking OSHA report to fill out.
Yeah. I better stop before I get sued.
You're not going to get sued because we're just talking about hypothetical things that you may have heard of.
Yeah,
we're not mentioning any names.
Yeah.
Okay. So
can I tell you one that happened to me personally?
I will sit here, and I'm going to speak for you, Michael. I'll sit here for as long as we have stories of men coming out of containers. They went in clothed and came out naked.
So when I went from lab tech to chemist, anything that involved a hazardous chemical I owned it. So I get a call Christmas Eve, late 90s. My kids are small. I'm doing Santa Claus for my kids. I get a call from the plant. Now you got to remember this is Southern Illinois. Could you come out to the plant? We've got smoke. Smoke is coming out of all the windows, and it smells like a chemical of some kind. And I said, nobody touched nothing. I'm on my way. I get out there like 1 o'clock in the morning, and all the way to work, I'm thinking, what could it be? So I get there. I'll go ahead and put my hazmat suit on. I walk out to this water treatment plant, which I knew that was where we were using, only place we were using acid. And I open the door, and the whole floor is a lake of sulfuric acid. And so then I'm thinking, all right, why is this happening? What have we done today? What changed in the system that could have caused this? And my first thing was, why aren't my sump pumps taking this to the waste pond? Mm-hmm. So I go out to the sump pumps. The first thing I noticed was in the hazmat suit, you've got these rubber boots that come up to your knees. My rubber boots start sticking to the deck, which is steel, because it's so hot. When acid and water mix, it's an exothermic reaction. And there was water already in the sump. So I open the lid to the sump, and I shine my flashlight down in there. I've got 2 massive sump pumps. All the parts of the sump pumps are laying in the bottom of the sump. And that was my oh shit moment. I was like, not good.
Yeah.
So then I just start troubleshooting it and following it back, and I know everything that happened now, but it was one of the longest nights of my life. I had to build a dam. I had to get workmen out there and build a dam and dam the acid up. I got the acid tank isolated was the first thing I had to do. So I had to deal with that lake of acid. Luckily there are companies that you can call, like the fire department, and say, I got to get some chemical pumped out of here.
How many of those companies are there?
Not many.
I was gonna say, I feel like fires are way more.
Yeah, 2 or 3. Halliburton's one of them. You've heard of Halliburton. They did a lot of stuff in Iraq.
Oh, yes, they did.
So they came out, and I got it dammed up. You have chemical containment equipment. We contained the chemical, and they threw a suction hose into it the next day and pumped it into tanker trucks and got it out of there. But it was just a massive mess. It was all because one guy was being lazy and didn't close one valve.
Oh, man. What do you do with those hazmat suits when you're done?
You have to throw them away once you've used them in real hazardous condition.
What do they do with them from there? Do they bury them or do they burn those things?
They bury them in a landfill.
Okay.
In a lined landfill.
Yeah. Yeah, if your boots are sticking, I don't like that at all, because then my question would be, how close am I to these boots melting through, and then I'm standing in sulfuric acid?
Yeah, I got around so many hazardous chemicals. It's amazing I didn't have more health problems than I did.
I mean, other than the most rare form of leukemia known to man.
Yeah, other than that.
When you were working in the industry, did you have any indications of health issues, or was that something that just
I thought I was
snuck up?
absolutely bulletproof.
Really?
And I took some risks that I shouldn't have taken. One thing I am proud of, I never sent my crew into a hazardous situation. I always went myself. And I exposed myself to a lot of things. And a couple of times I was concerned that other people were going to be hurt, and I went into chemical clouds without my hazmat gear on. Stupid stuff. I wouldn't do it now. Why would you do that? Macho. I was young and stupid.
Yeah.
But I was afraid this guy was going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So I'll go close the valve. And
I mean, you probably at least held your breath, right? So you're fine.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, literally, I did.
I'm not a scientist. I think just holding your breath in a chemical cloud is probably not good enough.
Not very effective.
Yeah, getting in your ears.
And I would have been
fired.
To their credit, they would have fired me if they'd known I'd done that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I get it. There's the letter of the law and the intent of the law, and sometimes people take actions to get the things done that need to be done. But so when did the health problems sneak up on you? Because it seemed like it was a little bit of a sniper attack.
Yeah, it was. So I go 30 years of power generation. In the early 2000s, I began to really be interested in how the EPA was changing. And I started looking at, I don't know what made me see the big picture. Nobody was seeing this. And I was like, we are regulating ourselves literally to death.
Well, what were the changes? What was it like before, and then when did you notice the changes?
When I first got in the industry in the 80s, and I worked with EPA some then, it was more of a partnership. Let's keep the environment safe. When Obama was elected, it became, you're bad guys. You don't give a damn about the environment. We're going to catch you. And then it was regulation on top of regulation on top of regulation. And so I started looking at how the regulatory environment was going to affect our future as the plant where I was working at the time. And I was like, okay, if they're doing this to us, they're doing it to everybody. And I began to write technical papers on how we were going to jeopardize the grid. The grid has to have balance. Mm-hmm. Energy has to flow in a balanced manner. So if you've got all your power plants, I'm just going to make up a silly example, in Chicago, Illinois, for the whole nation, the grid can't handle that. That's why we've got plants.
Because of the distance it would have to travel?
Well, because you've got so much energy going through a bottleneck. If you think of it as water flowing instead of electricity, that it overheats everything.
Okay, that makes sense.
That happened, if you think about the New England blackout of probably the mid to late 90s, blacked out multiple states.
I did not remember that. What happened there?
There, you had a power plant trip, which does happen. And
meaning an internal safety mechanism to shut it off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Shuts off the units. And then another power plant had a problem at the same time. So two power plants in the same region when there was a lot of high demand, and then a domino effect started happening. Then the grid started overheating. A little substation failed here. Another one failed here. You ended up with about 5 or 6 states and part of Canada blacked out.
Man, how do you unwind that? Do you have to rebuild the power? You see, you have to go kind of in the reverse order as the dominoes fall. Holy cow.
And there's guys that are called load dispatchers, or as we call them in the industry, God. And they call you and they say, I need 150 megawatts from you. Can you help me out? And they start calling around, and they all communicate, and they get the power from other places and reroute it. And they're experts at what they do.
Yeah.
But why were we talking about that? I forgot the question.
I don't remember the question either. We were talking, the cascading. Oh, EPA.
Yeah. So EPA, I thought they're going to shut down enough plants that at some point in the future, we're going to have an unstable grid. And everybody thought I was a complete clown. Nobody, even people in the industry, thought I was way overreacting. And I'm just a schmuck and working at one power plant. So I wrote a book called Going Green. I was on my way home. Let me tell you a little bit of the background. EPA Region 5 meeting. They had just told us about another new regulation, 316B of the Clean Water Act. We were going to hire a marine biologist to babysit gizzard shad minnows, because an environmental group, who I won't name because I really will get sued the EPA. That's how most environmental regulations happen. Environmental activists sue the EPA, force them to make a regulation about a thing. Hey, these power plants are sucking in these fish. When they turn on their cooling water pumps, which all power plants are near a water source, they're sucking in these fish, killing them, impinging them, and it's hurting the species. Well, there's about a gazillion gizzard shad in the Ohio River where we were anyway. And then I did a little bit of studying, a little cocktail napkin sketch, and realized, okay, the average flow velocity of the Ohio River is 0.8 feet per second. The flow velocity of our pumps coming into the plant is 0.5 feet per second. So any self-respecting gizzard shad, if he's not drunk, can dart away from our pumps anytime he feels like it.
Yeah.
And I wrote this in a very formalized report to EPA, and they told me to go jump in the lake. So I was going to have to hire a marine biologist. I ended up spending $500,000 to study the impact we were having on the gizzard shad. 3 years later, they found out I was right in the first place. And that regulation was so we were coming back from the meeting where they told us about the regulation, and the guy that was leading the meeting was like, and there were 150 power plant chemists in this room and environmental engineers. He was talking to us with hostility. Like
the EPA guy was?
Yeah. So we were on our way back, and I told my buddy that I was carpooling with, environmental engineer, I said, we cannot be this stupid as a nation. I said, there has to be something sinister driving this many regulations over such silly things. So I knew not to write a nonfiction book because nobody would read it. So I said, I'm going to write a novel about the environmental movement. And he said, you can't write a novel that's entertaining about the environmental movement. I said, no, I think I can. So I wrote this book called Going Green. It got published. I got a publishing deal. It would take me too long to tell all the stories, but I ended up meeting a guy named Dr. Roy Spencer. He was the official climate scientist of the EIB network. He was a NASA climate scientist, but he didn't believe climate change was man-made. He believes in climate change. He just thinks man-made. And he and Al Gore had some debates in front of Congress, and I mean, he was a heavy hitter. Mm-hmm. I ended up meeting him. He found out about my book, and he endorses my book. Well, because he's the official climate scientist of the EIB network, he gets me invited onto the Rush Limbaugh program. All right, if you're a author, the only thing better than being on the Rush Limbaugh program is being on Oprah. And Rush was pretty darn close. Most of his guests, and he didn't have many, were on the number one on the New York Times bestseller list the next day. Well, my publisher went bankrupt before I could make the appearance. So my book ends up locked in a warehouse. But now I'm selling books literally like Grisham started out and out of the trunk of my car. Just anywhere. They gave me the 5,000 books as a settlement. So now I can't park my car in my garage because my garage is full of my own books.
I was just going to ask you where you stored them.
So I'm selling books everywhere. But in that time, I became kind of an activist against environmental regulations. I got asked to speak a lot of places. I ended up getting invited to debate a member of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I won per audience exit poll. And I was just a chemist. Dr. Spencer and other climate scientists helped me tremendously, by the way, or I would have gotten my ass kicked. But so I ended up really becoming active in that, and I started writing policy papers. So two things happened. If you bear with me here, this is going somewhere. I'm trying to sell the books. I'm also writing policy papers. I'm also working at a power plant. A couple of the policy papers actually got read by people that mattered. The book, I went to Phoenix, Arizona I was like, okay, it's a political thriller. What if I started a political column in my local paper? And then I have a byline at the bottom. Also, you can buy Chris Gates' political thriller here. Didn't work worth a darn. I probably didn't sell 5 books. But the political column took on a life of its own. I got picked up nationally by multiple places. So now I'm making a little pocket change writing a column. I had to be careful that my employer didn't get too much heat because I was not the popular thing would have been to say climate change is going to kill us all by 5 o'clock. I was on the other side of it. So I'll go to a political convention in Phoenix, Arizona, Motel 6, cheapest flight I could get, the whole thing, box full of books in the bottom of the plane. I'm selling books out in the parking lot, you name it. Most people told me, get out of my face, that kind of thing. I sold one book to a guy, didn't know him from Adam. He read it, loved it, takes it back to his workplace. Well, his workplace was the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank in Washington, D.C. He leaves the book in the break room with a yellow Post-it note on it. Hey, guys, this is an incredible book. You got to read it. I don't know any of this is happening. I'm thinking, man, what a failure. I missed my opportunity to be on Rush Limbaugh. Now I'm stuck with all these stupid books. I started hating my own book. Maybe 6 or 8 months goes by. The next lady that picks it up is a lady named Becky Norton Dunlop. She was the vice president of the Heritage Foundation. She loved the book. She gave it to her husband. He was high up in another think tank. He loved it. I had the foresight to put a business author card in every book. So she had my number. So a year after I sell this book, she calls me. She says, Mr. Skates, my husband and I read your book. We think you're really insightful. If you're ever in D.C., we want to take you to dinner. Thank you so much. I don't know why I would ever be in D.C., but if I'm there, I'll call you. In the meantime, I'm writing this political column. So a guy was running for governor who I thought was a really interesting person, Matt Bevin. He was going to come to my local town. And I was like, I need something to write a political column about this week. Let me see if I can get an interview with this guy. I call his campaign. They agree you can have 15 minutes. That's all. So I go meet him. 15 minutes goes by, and they come to get him. And he says, no, I'm enjoying talking to this man. Come back later. We end up talking for 3 hours. We really connected. We saw a lot of things the same way about the energy industry, but just politics in general. I'm a political junkie too. So he and I stay in touch, and I help him. He's running for Senate at that time against Mitch McConnell, which nobody runs against the Senate Majority Leader. He ended up having a very respectable showing. I think he got 35% of the vote. But we stayed in touch. Meanwhile, he ends up a year later. I'm still selling books out of the trunk of my car. I'm writing another book now, just as a hobby mainly. And he ends up running for governor a year later. He asked me to be on his transition team to chair the energy subcommittee because by then we had talked energy a lot. Mm-hmm. So I ended up interviewing his Secretary of Energy. Ultimately, it ended up being a great guy. I get appointed to the Bevin administration. So because I wanted to write a political column to sell these 5,000 books out of my garage, I totally changed my life at 51. Get a gubernatorial appointed position as a speechwriter / energy advisor.
In Arizona.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky, okay.
So
basically the same thing I've been told.
Yeah. So after I'd been doing that for a year or so, I get sent to Washington, D.C. for a meeting of the National Governors Association. I'm like, man, that lady said she would take me to dinner, but she's not going to remember me after all this time. So I end up calling her. She answers on the first ring. I'm the author of Going Green. I don't know if you remember. You asked me to dinner. She said, I absolutely remember. She said, where are you going to be staying? I told her. She said, we'll pick you up at 6 o'clock.
Damn.
So only then do I Google her. She had been the Undersecretary of the Interior for Ronald Reagan. Her husband had been Undersecretary of Agriculture. So talk about a power couple. During the Reagan administration, they controlled every acre of public land in America. So guess who they dealt with all the time? The environmental groups.
Oh, just only every day.
Yeah.
Every minute of every hour of every day.
So we go out to dinner, and when they picked me up, I kind of did a little fanboy thing. I was like, let me ask you guys something. I said, did you ever sit around the Oval Office and strategize with, because Ronald Reagan's a huge hero of mine, strategize with President Reagan? They said, oh, yeah, about every day. And I was like, yeah, now, you know, it's just cool. I was out with these people.
Yeah. And they were at think tanks at the time?
They were at think tanks at that time.
What the hell does a think tank do? Other than, I mean, I know it's not in a tank, but I feel like they're thinking.
Have you heard in the debate, did you hear Kamala talk about Project 2025?
Yes.
Project 2025 was a creation of the Heritage Foundation.
Okay.
So they write policy. They get
They just ideate all day long?
Yeah.
And throw stuff against the wall to
Yeah.
see what sticks?
Yeah, but they have a lot of experts in certain areas. Like I know two of the guys that wrote the energy part of Project 2025, and it's damn good.
Yeah.
And it would work like a charm if we tried it. I don't know about the rest of it. But so they get industry experts to brainstorm solutions to problems, and then they pass that forward to leadership, political leadership, and see if we can get some of the stuff implemented.
Who funds them?
Private donors.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're at dinner, and just it was awesome. They loved my book. They asked me a lot of things. How did you come up with this? What made you think of that? But the part that really stuck with me is she said, Mr. Skates, we dealt with the environmental activist groups up close and personal for our entire careers. And she said, the plot of your book, you nailed it. And I got chill bumps because I'm just a little guy down here at a power plant kind of spitballing what I think is driving things.
What was your premise?
That foreign governments were funding environmental activist groups to drown American industry in regulations so that their economies could come up and ours would be pushed down.
What an interesting approach to unconventional warfare.
And
Okay.
in addition to funding from them, they were getting funding from radical Islam. And
Okay.
and it's not like Osama comes up with his Osama bin Laden. You know Osama better than anybody.
For clarity, I don't know him at all. But
And writes a check. I mean, they do it. They go through about 5 or 6 shadow
Of course,
companies,
of course.
and then you get it from the American Patriotic Foundation.
Yeah.
You know, some really greatly named American flags everywhere. So you think you're taking money from a good guy, or maybe you don't. Maybe you don't care. If you read that book, and I know we're not here to pitch that book, but I tried to have a character that represented all the different entities: the true believer,
Yeah.
tree hugger, the nefarious person who knows who's funding them but doesn't care,
Yeah.
because he's got his own agenda, and then the radicals themselves.
I've never thought about the environmental movement through the lens of being weaponized by a foreign power. That's definitely a long game, right? That's going to be measured.
They would deny this, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, so would 99% of the shit that our own government does. Okay, that's a long game measured in decades.
Yeah. So we go to dinner. They tell me, great book, you nailed it. I go back home, keep working for Governor Bevin. In the meantime, I got to go to D.C. more. Governor Bevin doesn't get reelected. I get appointed as senior energy advisor in the Trump administration because in my energy role with Governor Bevin, I worked with DOE headquarters a lot. Mm-hmm. So we didn't get reelected. I had a job in like 2 days. So I go to D.C. I think I'm a little intimidated. I don't really want to be in D.C. I'm a country boy, turkey hunter. But I was like, maybe this is this book here that we're going to talk about in a minute is about calling. So I'm like, maybe this is my calling. In that role, I get to write a Trump tweet on energy, just one.
Yep.
But not many people can say they did that.
What did it say?
There was power plant closing in Kentucky. It was a political closure. Governor Bevin and I had met with the CEO of Tennessee Valley Authority and tried to talk him out of closing it. You couldn't get through to him. And it wasn't that he didn't understand, he didn't care. He actually left there, retired, and went to work for an environmental activist group. I'm not going to say his name, but
I'm sure that was a random occurrence and
just
not
happened.
tied.
Yeah, no. So President Trump called Governor Bevin, and Governor Bevin called me into his office, and that was the only time I got to be on the phone with the President of the United States. He had him on speakerphone. He told me I was in the room. Told him I was in the room. It was him, Vice President Pence, and Secretary of Energy Rick Perry. And President Trump said, I don't want to give up anything confidential. He says, Rick, I don't give a damn if you got to go down there and chain yourself to the friggin' gate. I don't want that plant closed. So we ended up trying to stop it. We couldn't stop it because TVA does whatever they want to do. And but through that interchange, he said, hey, Matt, he called the governor Matt. He said, tell your boy there to write me a tweet about the plant closing. Send it to me, and I'll tweet it out tonight. So I wrote one Trump tweet. I've got it on my phone.
Do you remember what it was?
Something about coal is an important part of our energy matrix, and closing the Paradise plant is premature and will be a net negative for the stability of the energy grid, something like that.
The problem with writing a Trump tweet, not that that's not cool, is that probably the tweet before that and afterwards was referring to somebody's wife or mother in regards to a pig wearing lipstick or some other off-the-wall shit. So I feel like it might have gotten a little bit lost.
That's amazingly...
Oh, here we go. Damn, he found it.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
That's
coal,
it?
Yeah. Coal
Man, you're
is
good.
an important part of our electrical generation mix. At TVA News, should give serious consideration to all factors before voting to close viable power plants like Paradise number 3 in Kentucky. Hell yeah.
That's like poetry.
I mean, it's not bad. Michael, could you pull up like the tweet immediately after that where he's probably telling somebody to go fuck themselves?
You're exactly right, though. That is
his
the
presidential
challenge.
account. Oh, dude, don't even bother going.
Yeah,
I mean,
it'll take you forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was it.
Anyways,
so,
I'll look.
What's that?
I'll look.
Yeah. If you
so
can.
we end up, that was when I first interacted with Secretary Perry.
Yeah.
Then there were some other really positive interactions later on other issues. So I get appointed to D.C. I'm in D.C. for one day. And the Deputy Secretary says, hey, we hear you write good energy speeches. I had written some for the governor. I said, yeah. And he said, the Vice President needs one in the morning. I don't even have my desk yet. So I got to write an energy speech for Vice President Pence my first day on the job. I don't know how much of it he used. All I know is the man said he wanted a speech. Here it is.
Yep.
And then I lost track of it after that. I was drinking from a fire hose. I just started my new job, senior energy advisor. So 2 or 3 days goes by, and I get a call. It says unlisted number. I'm living in an apartment in D.C. My wife hadn't moved up yet. I have a lawn chair, an air mattress, and a box of ramen noodles.
I mean, that's bachelor heaven.
Yeah. And I get this call, no caller ID, answer it. They said, this is the White House, please hold. It was the chief speechwriter for President Trump. He said, hey, we liked your Pence speech. Can you help us write one about energy for President Trump? I said, absolutely. Well, I said, when do you need it? They said, right now.
Did these guys ever plan ahead?
So I'm on the, well, I think they just saw they had an asset and they might as well leverage
Gotcha.
it. And one thing about being a speechwriter, I can say this from being a gubernatorial one, it's coming at you fast.
Really?
Because he's getting invited to all this stuff. And
How much time would you say on average you had to prepare a speech, or at least your draft of it?
most of mine, I had a week or so.
Okay.
But when you're
That's reasonable.
Yeah. When you're right for the president, they come at you all the time that day, and you got to have it the next day. Because the president gets some great opportunity to speak on an issue, and you got to be really fluid. So
How do you think presidential speeches would go if they had to write them themselves?
if it was a politician like Governor Bevin, still pretty good because he was an outstanding extemporaneous speaker and writer.
Yeah.
Trump, maybe not as much.
Be rough. There's a lot of adjectives.
Yeah. So I don't want to talk myself out of a future job here.
No, I'm just thinking in general, because you can really mask who you are as a person if other people are giving you the words to say.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they exist in a world where, like, I get it. There's a reason why politicians have speechwriters. But I think, maybe on Wednesdays it's got to be an original piece de resistance.
Yeah.
And you get up there and you're like, what the fuck was that, man?
Well, here's what I will say this about speech writing. And I've told younger speechwriters that I've tried to help this. If you write a speech and it's extremely eloquent and it really nails the point and it's great for the audience that you're speaking to, and it sounds like something you would write or say, you failed.
Yeah, it needs to sound like what they're going to write or
You're
say.
an impressionist. You remember the guys that do voices?
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. When I was working for Governor Bevin, I would listen to audio for hours each day to get his voice in my head. And then I would write it.
So you're almost playing that character, and I don't mean that in a negative sense.
That's right.
Okay.
That's a good way of saying it.
Okay, an impressionist. I get that. Yeah, so you'd have to immerse yourself in how that person thinks, how they speak, their inflection, the mannerisms.
Yeah.
That would be a bastard for Trump.
Yeah. And when these guys aren't shrinking violets, they're not going to say something they don't feel comfortable saying. So you give them the draft of the speech, they'll red mark all over it.
Yeah.
I'd never say that. Don't have me say that. That kind of. And you learn, you get better. As I went on, I got less and less red ink. Yeah. Sometimes I got none, and that was great. But really, you're there as to help the candidate or the executive, and they've got so many things to speak on in a given day. They can't possibly know everything about every topic. But anyway, on the Trump, the speech I helped with, I got a call another couple weeks later that he really liked it, and they played the majority of the role. These guys are outstanding writers. I don't want to make out like they really needed a big lift from me, but they said, hey, he liked it. He wants you to come to breakfast at the White House. So I'm like, this is what the point I really wanted to make while I went down this rabbit trail. I'm like, this is the fulfillment of my whole life. This kid, I moved 43 times when I was a kid. I became a storyteller on playgrounds all over the South so I could make new friends. I said, all that crap I went through, this is what it was for. He's going to ask me to be on a speechwriting team. I'm going to leave DOE headquarters where I've only worked for a month, and I'm going to the White House, baby. 5 days later, 3 days before the breakfast at the White House, I collapse on a sidewalk in D.C. I don't know I'm sick. I don't have symptoms. I've had one other blackout episode a couple days before.
Was it essentially, did you feel like you fainted?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything just went black.
Okay.
And it was when I was coming up the metro steps, so I was breathing heavy.
Okay.
And a few days before that, I had been short of breath, and I was like, man, I'm getting out of shape. And I was working out pretty hard back then.
Other than that, though, overall feeling well? Like no headaches, vision issues?
I had a swollen lymph node, really badly swollen, about 2 or 3 weeks before that.
Okay.
Got some antibiotics at a walk-in clinic, and the swelling went down. I just kept going.
So you diagnosed yourself? Strong.
Diagnosed myself, yeah.
Strong.
So the night before that, I said, I got to ramp up my jogging. I'm not jogging enough. I'm getting too short of breath. So I was running the Washington Mall 2 nights before I collapsed.
Very Captain America of you.
So I got to say this too. I also tried to whoop a guy's ass, but we may go to that later.
No, we're going to go to that right now. What are you talking about?
Some soy boy hit me.
What is this soy boy?
You know, he looks like a Democrat from
Hold
a mile
on.
away.
Michael, when I hear the term soy boy, I think of you a little bit. What does soy boy mean?
Nah, he doesn't look like a soy boy.
It's like a blue hair, very, very liberal, LGBTQ.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
So
they hit you.
He hit me with his bike. I'm running the mall.
All right, so you're Captain America.
Yeah.
And was he like heading the same way? Was he heading at you? Was it a T intersection?
He was coming around, and I had stopped. Actually, I had my phone to take a picture of a monument. I don't remember what it was, and he hit me, and he says, "You're blocking the trail." And I said, "Get off that bike, boy! I'll whoop your ass right here." I'm from the South.
Why did you assume his gender like that?
So
I mean, that's very sexist.
Here's the thing: if I had gotten in a fight, he probably would have literally killed me because I would have had. I didn't know I had freaking leukemia. So, like the next day, I pass out on the sidewalk.
So there was no fight.
Right? You remember Monty Python, The Black Knight?
I haven't seen it in decades.
Where he cuts both his arms and legs off, and he's like, "It's just a scratch. Come here, I'll bite your leg off." That would have been what the fight would have been like. Soy Boy would have worn me out because I had no oxygen in my blood. So I pass out. I go to a medical clinic. No, I called a friend of the governor's. I said, I need a good doctor. I said, I passed out twice. Something's good.
Nobody called 911 while you were face down in the subway?
They wanted to, but I talked them out of it.
They didn't think of doing that while you were unconscious?
I don't know how long I was out. I think I was only out about 30 seconds.
That's really enough time to call 911.
Yeah, no, nobody did. I guess I talked to a guy. I remember a guy helping me up, a total stranger. And I was like, whew, I'm really getting out of shape. I'm still on the out of shape thing. Jesus. So I call a friend of the governor. They said, go to this internal medicine specialist, save my life. Go to a guy named Dr. Gary Miller. He said, I remember him holding my hands, which I was like, that's awkward. But he was looking at my fingernails.
Yeah, your capillary refill problem.
Yeah, and they were chalky white. He didn't tell me
the nail itself was.
Yeah, instead of having that pink, it's just like chalk.
Okay.
And he said, I think you may have a little bit more serious problem than you're thinking.
So initially and right off the gate, he was thinking there was something more. Okay.
And he said, I'd like you to see a friend of mine. He said, he's really good at this. I'm going to send you to a hematologist. So I was like, oh, brother, okay, I got to be at work tomorrow. He said, no, you need to go see this guy tomorrow. So I called my wife back in Kentucky. I said, hey, they're sending me to a hematologist because I passed out. I'm fine. They're overreacting. Don't worry about it. She said when she got off the phone, she believes God told her, no, he's not fine. Get yourself to D.C. So I wake up the next morning to go to the doctor. Remember, I'm supposed to be going to the breakfast at the White House. And she calls me from Reagan International Airport. She says, on your way to the doctor, swing by the airport and pick me up. I'm going with you. She got an emergency flight that night. Bless her heart. By the way, through all this, my wife was an absolute saint. So I go to this hematologist, but when I get to the door, the glass door to the doctor's office says oncologist / hematologist. I'm like, uh-oh. So he's the first guy that does some blood tests. Mm-hmm. They do a bunch of other tests. I'm sitting in an exam room. I'm really impatient because I need to get to work. And he comes in and he says, he was like pale himself. He was affiliated with Johns Hopkins Hospital, which was another lifesaver. He said, Mr. Gates, I don't know how to tell you this. You've got acute lymphoblastic leukemia.
He was able to tell you that in the same day, like in the same appointment?
Yeah.
Holy shit, that's a rapid test.
Yeah. And the guy, Gary Miller, sent me to the right people.
Yeah, it sounds
They're
like
the best in the world at doing these diagnoses. They're blood cancer experts. So I was completely macho flipping about it. I was like, okay, no problem. I said, what have I got to do, like some chemo or something? He goes, yeah, or something. I said, okay, listen, I got breakfast at the White House Wednesday. I'm going to go do that.
I love how this is the anchor in your universe.
Yeah. And when I get back, I'll come back here Thursday and you can give me whatever pills or whatever.
Because that's how chemo works. It's just a one-timer.
Yeah.
One and done,
And so he grabbed me by the shoulders and he said, Mr. Skates, you aren't hearing me. He said, there will be no breakfast at the White House. We're not starting your treatments Thursday. We're starting chemotherapy Monday morning. This was Friday.
Yeah.
He said, trying to defeat this disease will dominate the next year of your life. And that's when I realized, okay, this is pretty bad.
Yeah. Leukemia is cancer of the blood?
Yes.
Okay.
And I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, T-type, and then there's some medical jargon after that with something mutation, which means this leukemia is really pissed off.
So what does that essentially mean? Your body and your body's blood is attacking itself?
Yeah. And the leukemia cells are telling your marrow, stop making red and white blood cells, make us.
Interesting.
It's really creepy.
Okay.
So when he told me that about you, it'll dominate the next year of your life, he said, we cannot explain medically why you're not dead right now. He said,
That's how far down the rabbit hole you were.
He said, you have almost no red blood cells left. And he said, the reason you're passing out is because oxygen is not getting to your brain.
I was just going to say, it connected some dots for me as to why perhaps you'd be out of breath.
Yeah. So I'm in the hospital. Bingo, right then. I had to call the White House and say, sorry, I can't make breakfast. I'm dying.
How was your weekend like? You get diagnosed on Friday. Monday, you're going to start this. What was your Saturday, Sunday like?
I'm glad you asked that. The one thing I wanted to do before I went into the hospital was I wanted to see the Bible History Museum.
Okay.
So it was really crazy. From the time that I passed out, it was like I was going downhill fast. I could not walk through the museum. I couldn't get enough breath. So my son pushed me in a wheelchair. And there were just tremendous, I highly recommend it to anybody that wants to go. Just amazing artifacts from the 1500s, 1600s, paintings, Martin Luther's Bible with his handwritten notes in it is under glass. But the one thing that really grabbed me, and I actually wrote a story about this later and published it, there was a little tiny oil lamp that was carbon dated or however they do it to the time that Jesus would have been on the earth. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed like, because of how small it seemed like a kid's nightlight. And that hit me so hard. I was like, if there's a God in the universe and he can let this lamp survive 2,000 years so that I can see it a couple days before I start chemotherapy, then it doesn't really matter if I live or die. There's a sovereign God, and this is not the end. And from that day forward, I can say honestly, I was never afraid of the chemo, the bone marrow transplant, nothing. I didn't enjoy it, but I wasn't afraid of dying at any point. I was more afraid of leaving my wife in a bad situation.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was all I remember doing. I don't remember anything Sunday, just packing some stuff and laying around and trying to breathe.
So what were walk me through that year, the treatments. What did they do?
So the guy that said this will dominate the next year of your life was, I don't want to use his name, but he was working for a specialist at Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins, in my opinion, is the best in the world at blood cancer. That doctor, I will mention, Dr. Mark Levis, is a world-renowned expert on acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So I had to have a consultation with him. And he said, we're probably going to kill you with chemo. He said, this is such a nasty cancer. The only way to get it into remission is to give you 3 chemos at the same time.
Jesus.
So I go into the hospital Monday. I'm in the hospital 6 weeks straight. While I'm getting chemo, the news comes on. We're locking down Washington, D.C. because of a thing called COVID. They tell me if you catch COVID, we're probably going to lose you. So my wife had to treat me like a boy in a bubble. She had to clean herself up before she came in the room, the whole thing. I had no immune system.
Yeah.
So they're chemoing me, and this, I'll tell this as a funny aside. They told me that they had given this kind of chemo treatment to people. They had lost several. Others were laying in the floor sobbing because you're just so sick. I got hungry week 3. I told my wife, I said, I'm in the mood for some ribs. I was just talking to Michael about getting some ribs after this. And so my wife she said, are you sure you need to be eating that? I said, yeah, I'm fine. The doctor comes in, the oncologist comes in. I'm slamming a half a rack of ribs and some cheese grits, this Georgia boy. I've got barbecue sauce dripping down my chin, chemo going into the veins. And this Dr. El-Shami, I said his name now, the Egyptian doctor that helped Dr. Levis from Johns Hopkins, he said, Mr. Skates, you, sir, are the toughest son of a bitch in medical history. Which I wear with a badge of honor. God. 2 weeks later, I was hugging the toilet.
I was going to say, what did that feel like to your body? What does it feel like when they're pumping that stuff in there?
You feel weird. You feel kind of out of it. But I didn't feel sick until 2 weeks later, and then I was just so sick. I mean, I can't even describe it.
Yeah.
I threw up so many times and trying to get anything to stay down. But you have to take in calories.
Yeah.
So my wife was just so good about trying to bring me anything from the hospital that I could eat, and sometimes it was just Jell-O was all I could hold down. Sometimes it was just diluted Gatorade. For some reason, I couldn't drink straight Gatorade. I had to cut it in half with water, or I would throw it up.
Wow!
Just the taste was so nauseating to me. A lot of things that I'd loved, like coffee, were horrible.
Yeah,
tasting all of a sudden.
That doesn't surprise me because I feel like it changes your
taste
a lot of your senses. Did you have the standard chemo? Hair loss, all that stuff as well?
Not too bad with just the chemo. So 6 months of intense chemo.
Yeah.
Then they gave me 30 days to get a little bit of strength back. I'm in D.C., COVID lockdowns. I got a story for you about that too. And then the 30 days is so that you can get a little strength, and then they start the bone marrow transplant. As hard as the chemo was, it was a freaking walk in the park compared to the bone marrow transplant. My son was a 50% haploid match.
Yeah.
So he gets stuck with 200 needles in his pelvis.
200?
Yep.
Oh,
They pull his marrow out. They put it in my veins. They don't actually put it in your bones. And then somehow it migrates. It knows where it's supposed to be.
He's not conscious for that, is he?
No, he was under anesthesia. I was conscious for it to go in.
Which would make sense because they probably just give it to you.
Yeah. And I was pretty sick. But the first step of the bone marrow transplant is they put you in a big tube and they radiate you. They kill all your marrow.
Really?
That's when I lost all my hair, like the next day.
Eyebrows too?
Yeah. And
just like a heat-seeking flesh missile, just not a hair on you, just built for speed.
Yeah. And then I got more sick. I couldn't eat then. And I ended up losing around 90 pounds through the whole process.
Fuck.
And the other thing is, it's extremely painful when the marrow starts migrating through your bones. All my long bones were hurting like a bastard. And they gave me Oxycontin. I didn't want to take it, but I did. But there was a couple of times where I cried because the pain was that intense.
How was it for your son as the donor?
He was very sore. They take it out of the back of your pelvis, so your lower back.
Yeah.
He was very sore for probably 3 weeks. But he only got arrested a couple of days, and he ended up driving back to Lynchburg, Virginia, because he was locked down there in his job.
Jesus. And I'm assuming your body replaces that marrow over time?
Yeah, over time. But he felt pretty puny for about a month.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it was only a month, to be honest with you.
By the way, he's living with us temporarily. I told you he's 31. But I used to, when I came in, king of the castle, give me the remote. It's my TV. Now I'm like, he gave me his marrow. Keep the remote.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah. He watch whatever he wants to watch at my house.
That's fair. As you were talking about the 200 needles in my head, I was thinking, if you and I were a match for bone marrow, Michael, and you needed that, I would wish you well.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't do it.
I would say fair winds and following seas, Michelle.
Yeah.
You've lived a good life.
Yeah.
You have lived the best life of somebody in their early 20s, and I hope it was fulfilling and enriching for you.
It was. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that really sounds like it sucks.
So I go through the bone marrow process. Oh, man, I was so sick. But then we're locked down in Baltimore. We had to move to Baltimore. And by the way, financially, it would just wipe me out because I had a house in Kentucky I couldn't put on the market because of COVID. I had an apartment in D.C. I couldn't live in. And I had an apartment in Baltimore that wasn't covered by health insurance. So I had about $7,500 a month in housing payments.
Yeah.
And I was on disability, 35% of my salary. So some friends actually did a GoFundMe for the housing part, or we would actually have been in trouble. So go through all that. I get out October. I'm released to go back to work.
When did you start feeling better?
2020, late 2021.
When you maybe thought, hey, like some light at the end of this tunnel, like I'm actually appreciably starting to feel a little bit better.
I mean, I was able to work starting in November, but you felt like you weren't thinking clearly. You weren't, and you're just so weak. Like walking from my car to my apartment was a chore for probably 6 months or so. And then you'll have a day once in a while where you're like, man, I'm back, and then you overdo it a little bit and it just wipes you out for the whole weekend. But it was the following year before I started trying to exercise a little bit.
Okay.
I actually wrote a story, I may have sent it to you, called Writing with No Hands.
You did.
And the first thing I was able to do where I felt like I was really exercising was riding a bike. And that was tremendously freeing. When I was able to ride a bike on a bike trail, it was like being released from prison.
When did you get the notification that you were free and clear of cancer?
The type I have, it can come back anytime in the first 3 years, and you're a dead man in 3 weeks.
Are you through that 3-year window yet?
I'm through the 3-year window.
Okay.
So I'm considered officially cured now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm 4 years now.
Okay.
But even now, I have side effects, and I got this stupid thyroid thing called Graves' disease, and it's given me a lot of problems.
I've never heard of it.
A lot of body aches. My thyroid went nuts about a year in. I actually think the vax did that to me. I took the vax because I didn't have an immune system. They were afraid for me to get. My immune system, by the way, see, when I got the bone marrow transplant, my immune system right now is that of a 4-year-old child.
To this day?
Yeah. I think it's exponentially grows. So I think in another year or two, I'll have a regular man's immune system.
Yeah.
So I can catch things for my grandkids really easy.
How many doses of the vaccine did you get?
2.
Okay.
And
literally today, I was down in Missoula doing a blood draw for hormonal stuff. And I was riding back like I'm on a fucking wagon with a horse. I was driving back, listening to podcasts with Rogan and Brett. Is it Epstein? God damn it. Weinstein. Did you listen to this one?
He's
No,
really
I
interesting. He's an interesting guy.
Interesting. Biologist. They were talking about, and I don't want to turn this into a COVID discussion by any stretch, but I do like to listen to people who are educated and they're just kind of presenting information. I think it was called IgG4, and they are finding that people, when they get to the dosage of 2 COVID vaccines of the mRNA, that the IgG4 is starting to appear on tests. And what that is actually a suppression of your immune system, which they think the hypothesis is that suppression of the immune system might be tied to all of these other diseases that are exploding throughout the world that normally wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because people are a little bit more susceptible.
Have you heard of turbo cancer?
No.
That's cancers that they're seeing in places that they've never seen it in before. My wife had a tumor on her large intestine last year. So now we've both been through cancer treatments, and she's fine now. But she's still having some digestive issues because of the radiation. But the tumor that was on her large intestine, the oncologist in Nashville said, I've never seen this in this location in my career.
Did she also get 2 dosages?
She didn't do chemo. She did radiation.
Of the vaccine?
Oh, yes.
You know, and again, I know there is a large concern around vaccine hesitancy, and I don't claim to be an expert on it at all. But it seems to be that there are some statistically anomalous events around health,
no doubt about
that have come after that. And I think if they don't blow the curtain back on that, I mean, again, I like to believe that the vast majority of people in healthcare are there, right? They respect their Hippocratic oath. First do no harm,
sure.
And they want to actually figure out the solutions to problems. If you're not able to openly talk about that stuff, and we're going to try to sweep this stuff under a rug that's going to end up looking like Mount Everest, it's only going to get worse. So I think you have to get in front of it now and say, like, listen, we did the best we could. In hindsight, it might look like we fucked up. We didn't mean to fuck up, but we have got to get in front of this. And these doctors, we need to compile what the fuck is going on, and we need to do it openly, and people can poll against that. Because I think if they don't do that, it's just going to spiral.
Did you get it?
I did not. I got COVID 3 times. So I don't understand why I would get a vaccine if I have a natural immunity.
I ended up getting COVID anyway. So, this Graves' disease is really giving me a lot of problems. And it causes a lot of things like arthritis.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of it's that and how much of it's my transplant, because you can have inflammation. So I got inflammation all over the place. Well,
my wife has a biology degree, and we were talking about just the type of vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, what it has been used for, what it hasn't been used for, and just kind of observing it. I think I got COVID the first time half a year into, maybe, when it kind of exploded.
Yeah.
There was enough data at that point that I didn't feel like I was at risk of the point of taking something that I considered to be experimental.
Yeah.
I would have rather worked through the COVID virus itself naturally.
Yeah.
And it wasn't great. I mean, I felt like I had the flu, and I did lose my sense of taste and smell for probably about 30 days. Second time I got it was less, and the third time I got it, I was shocked when the test came back positive. And again, these are just my experiences. I'm not trying to say that that's the path or way for other people, but that's the reasons why I chose not to.
Yeah, I wish I'd chosen not to. I felt pressure because I wasn't sure where my immune system was.
For sure.
In retrospect, I would have never gotten it. I would just ridden out COVID.
I do think there are some question marks around that treatment, and I really, really hope we can find a place where people can have conversations about it, because otherwise I think it's going to get worse.
And reverse it. Let me give you a Chris Gatesism, and then we'll get off the vaccine thing. A conspiracy theory is only nutty when there's not a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. And the best conspiracy theories contain enough essence of the truth that they're sticky.
Right, yeah. So I go through all that stuff. I end up, when I get well and I'm working again, the deputy secretary did me a massive favor. He made me a full-time federal employee because he knew I had to have my health insurance.
Yeah.
So I went from being an advisor, which I really liked that job for the time that I got to do it, to a manager of a research program at DOE. DOE headquarters is the largest research institution in the world.
I did not know that.
So I was doing some power plant research on something that I was pretty well versed in because of my 30 years in power plants, and I had like 20 PhDs reporting to me. And I would get this paperwork, and it would say, by order of the United States Congress, you will distribute $15 million to research this problem. Well, I am political, and I'll try to keep this as unpolitical as possible. When I got back in that job, bingo, there'd been an election. Mm-hmm. I'm not working for President Trump anymore. And the people that I was working for knew my background, knew that Trump had appointed me, and they didn't like me at all. So I'm like, I'm going to leave. To their credit, we worked together fine for about 6 or 8 months. But I'm like, I'm going to leave a decimal place in the wrong place, and they're going to frickin' hang me. So the stress level, especially when my health wasn't good and I wasn't sure that my mind was 100% clear, I just couldn't handle it. Plus, we had been in COVID lockdown in D.C., 950 miles from home, for a year and a half. D.C. sucked in 2020 and 21. So you had all the bad stuff about D.C. and none of the cool museums. So my wife, finally in the spring, she said, honey, I've done everything I could for you. I've cooked for you. I've nursed you. She said, I'm going to Kentucky. She said, I want to see my grandchildren. So I started looking for a job. I found one back in Paducah where I had originally been, and that's where I am now. But I want to come full circle with you. Becky and George Dunlop, who read Going Green and took me to dinner, they ended up reading my other books. And when I got this book, Moonshine Over Georgia, ready for somebody else's eyes, I always like to have about 100 people read a manuscript.
100?
Yeah, around that.
Jesus, I don't even know if I know 100 people.
And then I get feedback, and I don't change anything unless 2 people say it.
Okay, that's fair.
And then I only take it under advisement.
Yeah.
But I wanted her to be one of my what I call beta readers. And she's a very busy lady. She was still VP of the Heritage Foundation at the time. And I asked her, would you be willing to read my manuscript? And she was intrigued by the story, so she read it for me. It took her about 6 months because she works a lot. She called me one day. I was still in the governor's office at that time, 2019. And she was emotional. And she said, Chris, I just wanted to call you. She said, I just finished Moonshine Over Georgia. And she said, I think this might be the best book I've ever read. So fast forward now to 2023. I had gotten an agent by then. The agent had tried to get me placed with a publisher. It never worked out. Publishers are very narrow-minded. And I'm back in Paducah working. I've recovered from leukemia. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm out walking my dog out on a wildlife management area. And my phone rings. I had a signal. And it was Becky. And she said, Chris, George and I are retiring. And we're talking about our retirement portfolio. And she said, we want one of our retirement investments to be in you. She said, we believe so strongly in your writing. She said, Moonshine Over Georgia is too good a book to not be published. We're going to back you. We're going to introduce you to the CEO of a publishing company. We're going to see Moonshine Over Georgia as a book. So think about that, Andy. I saw one book in Phoenix, Arizona, feeling like a failure because I had missed Rush Limbaugh. That book made its way to Washington, D.C. I become friends with Becky and George Dunlop. 10 years later, they financed this book, Moonshine Over Georgia, which we'll be talking about in a minute. And it wouldn't be a book today if not for them.
Yeah.
And we're still friends. Now we've been out to dinner multiple times. They've taken us out as a couple, and they're just amazing people with an amazing life. By the way, I went and saw the Reagan movie the other day. As soon as I got out of the theater, I called Becky. I said, what did you think of it? How much of it was true? She knew everybody that was portrayed in the movie really well. So amazing thing for my son to hear that. I put it on my truck phone. And just, I mean, how does a guy like me get to be friends with these kind of people? You know, Governor Bevin and I still talk all the time. Governor Bevin's an incredibly intelligent guy, very gifted guy. I actually spent the 4th of July with him. So it's just amazing where life takes you.
I agree. Since you're political, what do you think of the debate?
How honest can I be?
I think you should be totally honest. Speaking of people being up and out there and not allowing, you don't have a speechwriter during a debate.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more. I mean, obviously there's the prep and the coaching that can go into it, but the person is up there in real time. You're getting a little bit more of a clear look at it.
Am I allowed to take the filters off and be totally honest?
I would appreciate it if you did.
I think it was not Trump's finest hour.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of Trump, but I don't think he's a great debater. But we haven't had a great debater since probably Reagan.
Yeah.
But you can't ever say Kamala Harris won the debate because she didn't say a true statement in the entire time.
I don't know if either of them did.
I disagree.
I don't think they're actually there's probably some things that she said that were shades of the truth. And that's where her prosecutorial background favored her.
Okay.
She knows the line that she can go to without it being a lie. I don't think anybody won that debate because
it was a waste of time, yeah.
Nobody left knowing anything about the fucking candidates that you didn't already know.
Right. But I disagree. I think she lied like a rug. I don't think she said one factual thing.
Give me an example.
Oh, man. Now I can't remember the specifics. But let's just say the border.
Yep.
Saying that she wants to do this, she wants to do that, and that she wasn't border czar. That's a damnable lie.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you one. There's no soldier anywhere right now in a war zone.
Even better, even better. But to say that she didn't have a leading role in the migration.
I thought she was the border. How do you say it? SAR or czar?
Czar. I say it with a Z.
Why don't they just spell it ZAR so idiots like me can say it correctly?
And then there's the left always has semantics. Well, she wasn't the border czar. She was this. She had a leading role in the immigration policy of the Biden administration, which is a disaster. So that's one. You named the soldier one. Trump, he'll exaggerate. Best ever. Nobody ever had an economy this good. He exaggerates, but it's not a bald-faced lie. It was a really great economy under him, and it was continuing to be great until COVID hit. So you got to give him an out for COVID. Nobody saw that one coming. I'll speak about what he did in an area that I'm an expert in, energy.
Yeah.
He was and I'm a big Reagan fan, he was the best energy president in my lifetime. He was reining in the EPA in a very good way. Some of their overreach, but he also recognized that we had to have nuclear and fossil. We had to have a good energy infrastructure. Energy is the biggest economic driver there is. If electricity goes up, not only does it affect Andy at his home, it affects the grocer to run the coolers to keep the ice cream frozen.
Yeah, everybody.
It affects the guy driving the truck to deliver the milk, the whole thing. It's a multiplier effect like crazy. Trump got that better than anybody I've ever been under, and I've been watching it since Nixon.
Why do you think that is?
Because he's a businessman. And I think he had a few good people around him. He made huge hiring mistakes. Let me talk about this for a minute, since we're talking politics. A big weakness of a new candidate, an outsider candidate. Matt Bevin was an outsider candidate. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump was an outsider candidate. When you get elected, and I was standing there beside the man that got elected in the governor's race. We were a huge political long shot. We were very much a precursor to Trump. We got elected a year before him. Total long shot. But from the night before, you're a schmuck. Nobody in the Republican Party wants to talk to you. You got no chance. The night after,
you're the belle of the ball.
Yes. You walk out of your hotel room, and there are people in suits waiting for you. Right this way, we've arranged a news conference. You don't even know who these people are. They're from the party. So when in Kentucky, you have to hire 1,000 people in 30 days because, hey, guess what? Time to run the government.
Wow.
You're not going to get them all right. And you have to call on some insiders to say, what about the guy for Deputy Secretary of Hoopty Squat? Mm-hmm. And what you don't know at the time is, because you're a little naive and you're an outsider, is the guy that you're asking in government, there are not excellent liars. There are class 5-star liars. They're good at it. You can't see it. You think they're your ally. So they're like, oh, Joe Smo, he would be perfect in that role. Well, it turns out Joe Smo is an infiltrator. Joe Schmo is strictly sent to you so he can undermine your agenda. Because not only do the Democrats not like your agenda, the party establishment in the Republican Party doesn't like your agenda either. So you end up on 1,000 hires, you're going to whiff on some.
Yeah.
And then you've got spies in the camp. You figure it out, but by then it's time to get reelected. So you got to focus on that. After you get reelected, maybe you can fire the hell out of some of these people. You don't get reelected, you never get to clean house, you never really get to implement your agenda. I can say, I got to be careful. I don't want to, but
don't get sued.
in the Reagan administration, the Bush people in the VP's office were constantly undermining Reagan. I know this.
It seems like there is external fighting in both political parties and an immense amount of internal fighting. It seems like either political party is actually defined by just chaos and trench warfare, and sometimes your guns are pointed external, and it seems like half the time they're pointed internal. No, it's here's the thing. I actually, if I had been Trump, I would have asked her, even though she didn't describe her policies, I think the most powerful weapon that he would have had is, if that's what you think now, why aren't you doing this right now? And why haven't you done it?
And he did do that in his closing statement.
Well, that was 90 minutes after the fuck show that occurred.
And most people had gone to bed, yeah.
And,
it was a little late.
His policies from, to me, immigration is a huge one. The economy is a huge one. National defense is a huge one. To me, the biggest threat to Trump is actually Trump himself.
Yeah.
His policies, whether you agree with them or not, or one thing, he seems incapable of conducting himself as a leader.
Right.
At least through the characteristics and the leadership qualities that I was taught, raised, and promoted inside of the military.
He's not incapable of it, but he's not consistent at it.
Well, she completely baited him at that debate.
And he took it. He did.
And all she had to do, and I saw it happen.
His biggest weakness is his ego.
It's the quality in him that I admire the least.
Yeah.
It's not that it's because we all have egos.
Yeah.
It's his inability to not tolerate somebody needling his ego.
Yeah.
When she said the crowd sizes, I was yelling. I'm like, don't do it. Not because, I mean, it's like, do whatever you want to do. But he was so predictable. And then from there, it just went downhill. And I don't think he actually recovered.
I got to be in some meetings with him. I'm a fly on the wall. I'm not high enough to be speaking directly into the meeting, but he's a super smart guy. He gets it. He gets technical stuff. He gets energy stuff. He really gets economic stuff. Mm-hmm. In a meeting, he's a different guy than he is there. But it doesn't matter. You got to take the whole package. But you're right. People used to tell me, you got to get him to shut his mouth. That's never going to happen. He got to where it's his biggest threat, but it's also his biggest asset. The only reason he's where he is because he's shot from the hip his whole career. And it worked for him a huge percentage of the time.
Yeah.
I'll say this, and then maybe we can talk about my book.
We got nothing but time. Don't worry about it. We'll get to your book. First, we have to solve the fucking political problems of our country.
The country, you're going to think I'm being melodramatic. I'm not. I don't come to my political opinions lightly. I've been studying political science my whole life. The country will be so much better off in a Trump administration. I think a Kamala Harris administration will finish off the republic.
Do you think it would just be an extension of the Biden administration, maybe it put in fifth gear?
On steroids, yeah. Because then they'll say, well, hell, we didn't get punished for doing it for 4 years. We're going to double it for the next 4. And then that'll be enough. It'll be over.
How do you see, if the republic were to fail, how do you feel like that would go? What would be the first card?
I don't even know. I won't let myself think about it because I've got a 3-year-old grandchild and a 5-year-old grandchild. Yeah. So I've never run this scenario. All I ever think about is how can we turn it back around if we can get the office again.
It might need to, and I'm not an expert in politics. People say, Trump is Hitler and he's a threat to democracy.
That's
it's like
absurd. She's a lot closer to a fascist than he is.
Well, both of those things are actually inaccurate. Like, let's be honest. It's a colorful term that gets people to pay attention.
Yeah, it's overused.
And in my opinion, which counts for jack shit, if the world was going to fall apart, it would have fallen apart during his first 4 years. Guess what? He didn't destroy democracy. Did he do some shit that maybe requires a little bit more explanation? 100%. And honestly, I think one of the biggest things that will probably be, if Trump is unsuccessful, I think one of the nails in his coffin is going to be January 6th and his behavior during that time period, which is a tough one to explain away from a leadership perspective.
Yeah, I wish that had never happened.
I think he does too. I don't know if he's capable of admitting fault, though. If from a leader, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to fail because I don't care what leadership role you have associated with you. You're a human being.
Nancy Pelosi's got to go first.
But let's deal with one issue at a time. I think she should maybe go because she's 164 and too old to be in politics to begin with.
And she was Speaker of the House, and it was security of the Capitol was her responsibility.
Sure, but also the President of the United States told people to march on the Capitol, and he would see them there
in a peaceful, patriotic way.
Well, have you watched the whole video of the speech that he gave?
I probably did, but I was getting chemo at the time. Give me a break.
It's gnarly. And again, it's
some of the other speakers I didn't like. I was sick that day. Yeah. I was in the hospital that day. And
what he didn't do was get up in front of that and stop it. And he could have.
Yeah.
And he was in the seat at the time. So it's, did Nancy Pelosi?
I do think the people that were at the Capitol were incited.
Maybe.
You've got in that crowd, I bet you know a lot more about this, but you had some really redneck idiots. You had some instigators that were there to instigate and only to instigate, and he just had some average Joes.
What bothers me the most about that day, and this seems to be lost, is everybody wants to say whose fault it was or what happened. I hated seeing Americans clashing against other Americans.
Oh, yeah.
And I know some of those people who are Capitol Police. I've walked the halls of the Capitol building with them since, and I've walked right to that place where the woman was shot coming through the little glass panel on the side. And I've been to enough places and engaged in enough warfare that I don't want to see that shit in our country, especially with Americans versus Americans. Those Capitol Police, that they're normal people.
Yeah.
They're not Hulks. They're not He-Mans. Like
Right.
Captain America is a Marvel iteration. It's not a real thing. And those people, they weren't tooled for that. And to be honest with you, even if Nancy Pelosi had called them all, and they're like, hey, we need the National Guard, we're still talking about Americans pitted against Americans. I just wish it had been stopped before it got to that point.
I was looking at it you were looking at it from the Capitol Police perspective. I was sick that day, but I was watching it on TV. I'm freaking 5 miles away.
Yeah.
And my first thought, my absolute gut instinct was, this is a false flag. Trump, I've been to too many Trump rallies. Trump people don't do this shit.
They leave early, I've been told.
No, they don't do that either.
But that was the perfect bait that got him to bite.
Yeah, but they're not rioters. They're patriotic as hell. Something had to happen to get that first group. I do know a few people that went into the Capitol like 45 minutes later. They were walking from so far where he spoke. By the time they got to the Capitol, they were like, "Oh, a Capitol tour." They didn't know anybody had broken into anything.
Yeah.
So it's a mess. But I don't think that was just because it was at the Capitol, I don't think it was any worse than what those guys went through out in Seattle, where we had federal agents blinded with the lasers. Remember that?
Oh, for sure.
And the federal building there, that was just as bad, and that was completely from the left. We're in the most dangerous spot we've been in our lifetimes in this country.
I don't think it will fall. And we were talking about, and I was asking you the first card that may fall.
I don't either. I'm optimistic.
I think it has to be at threat of falling, though, before drastic changes will be made. And I do believe that we're at a place where drastic changes have to be made.
Yeah.
I think we have to restructure.
And Trump will make them. She won't. She'll make it worse.
I don't know if he will. I mean,
well, if he doesn't, who?
he likes to say he's not a politician. He was the president of the United States. He's running for it again. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah, he is now. Yeah.
You're in politics.
Yeah, I agree.
And it seems as if I can't figure this one out. Is politics like that sump palm that you had that was full of acid and it corrupts people, or are people?
Oh man, I can speak to that.
You know what I mean? Like I'm saying, it's like, does it change the person, or is it the type of person that wants to be that way? You know what I mean? Like, is the chicken or the egg? I guess is the question on that.
Let me speak personally. When I first got there, I was so intimidated. I was like,
in D.C.
When I'm talking about the state capitol.
Okay.
And I was like, I am not smart enough to be here. They're going to figure out I'm a dummy, and I'm going to get fired.
That's literally how I walk around every day, just so you know.
That was my biggest fear. And then I hit a couple of Grand Slam home runs. I wrote a couple things that really went viral and did well and was read by some important people, including the governor.
Yeah.
And it didn't take me long at all to get cocky. Looking back on it now that I've been through cancer, I'm alarmed at how quick I got cocky. And I was the little things that I was in charge of, which were little, relatively speaking, to what some of the other people in the administration did, but I was running with an iron fist. I was getting things done now. Yeah. I was very effective, but I said I and me all the time.
Let's be honest. It feels good to win.
Yeah.
It feels good to be asked to do something and then to perform and then have people lean on you. I think politics, like really strong medication, needs to come with a warning label and a maximum exposure because I do think absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It does. And the other thing is I am a big believer in real life spiritual warfare. And there is a darkness in government that I'd never experienced anywhere else.
Do you think that comes from the power? What do you think? Where do you think it comes from?
I think there's actually spiritual forces that are externally impacting people.
Chris, what in the hell are you talking about? Describe to me these spiritual forces.
The devil, Satan.
All right.
So I think demonic forces. So my personal thing was I started flirting. There's gorgeous lobbyists all around. I was in a position close to the governor, and I've got a wonderful wife at home, and I got really flirty. And I can see how guys get pulled into an affair. I wasn't important enough to get.
Have you ever considered that was a catfishing scenario, and or like a honey trap scenario, and they were trying to entice you to do it?
Yeah. I do think that.
Yeah.
But I think that because I believe in sin and all that good stuff, that the very thing that you're most vulnerable to is the thing that you'll be presented with. And so I had ego, and I'm a weird guy. I can go from completely self-loathing on Monday to completely egotistical on Tuesday.
Is there generally something in common that happens that helps you make that switch?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out, dude. But I saw guys. This is the way I like to say it because I would rather keep it general. As dark and corrupt as you think government is, it's much, much worse.
And that's where I go.
I saw it.
I believe you, and that's where I go chicken or egg.
And I didn't see it with Governor Bevin or President Trump, by the way. And I was around them a lot in private, and they were always above board the times I was around them.
Again, in that chicken or egg, is it the environment and that ability to wield power that corrupts you, or just the people who are maybe evil or more malicious? They seek out those roles.
It's probably some of that too. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. It doesn't surprise me at all that it is darker because people who want to do horrible shit to people, they want to get into a place where they can exert their will on those that don't want it. And unfortunately, in our country, the most powerful place to do that in the land is in politics.
And there's a lot of guys that were pencil necks in school, back in high school, and now all of a sudden they've got authority. They will murder you before they'll give it up. I'm talking about bureaucrats now.
Well, people in positions of power are very unlikely or unwilling to give it up. And I think that's probably as old as the history of man and people get into those positions.
If I ever got an offer to go back, I would, only because of my grandkids. And I think I know I would. After what all I've been through, I would have a much different, more humble approach. Now, there's times when you just got to kick ass, intellectually speaking, or the argument has to be over and you just have to slam your hand on the table and do the thing that you think is right. But if you have that authority. But I don't think I would. I know I wouldn't go on the ego trip I went on before, but you would have to be constantly vigilant.
Yeah. I think the only way, if it gets personal opinion here, I have no data to support this, people. If it gets to that point where it looks like we actually might fail, my hope would be that as the citizens of this country, we figure out a way to restructure the government so people can't wield the power that they do for as long as they do.
Right.
There has to be changes made. The size of the government. And also, let's be really honest.
We agree there.
Well, let's be really honest, too. What percentage of the government every 4 years do we get to vote on?
Not near enough.
A minority.
Tip of the iceberg.
I use this example.
By the way, I need a bathroom break.
Okay, go. The hell were we even talking about?
We're rolling. That you had said that Trump was the best president of your lifetime and that you were going to vote for him and encourage all your friends to vote for him.
But all those things are demonstrably false. I encourage people to vote. I don't give a shit who they vote for. I think, I was actually going back to the military. There's a stat about 75% of active duty military vote, which is still low. And then 35% of veterans vote, which is an interesting decrease. Yeah. And people may ask why, and my theory is they get a little bit disillusioned for working for the government.
Well, I do want to get off politics, but in the 2016 election, I think we had 38% turnout. No, 35 in 2016, 38% of the voting populace. Mm-hmm. That's a shame. When the country's in as bad a shape as it is, we need more turnout.
Yeah. And
we'll get better candidates. But anyway, we are.
Well, better candidates. And I remember what I was going to say, the power of people in government we don't vote for. The example that I use is in the SEAL community, at least when I switched over to becoming an officer, there is a detailer. And there's an active duty officer that rotated in and worked with this particular detailer. So the active duty officers was about every 2 years. The detailer, I'll leave her name out of it, was there since the time of the pyramids, it seemed. She had sticky notes all the way back to multiple star admirals and had been working with them since they were ensigns. And these people had the ability to reach out and communicate with her and get things done that they shouldn't have been able to get done because of the influence and relationship that she had. Mm-hmm. And an argument could be made, it's great to have that continuity and that point of contact. But another argument can be made is at some point in time, that person is actually wielding more power than the person that's supposed to be working for her in the military, the active duty officer. And I think we've passed that point with a lot of these embedded government employees, entities that, we get to change who's living in the White House, but these people never leave. Left, right, center, they're still there.
Yeah.
And they wield so much power.
And they based on my experience being at DOE headquarters, the Democrats have done a much better job at getting people that are left of center in those positions than the Republicans have of getting people that are right of center.
Why do you think that is?
Here's my theory, and it's only a theory. People that lean conservative are very, very individualistic, very self-sufficient. They don't want government for a long-term career. They'd rather go run a business. I can make a lot more money in the private sector. What do I want to do this for? Democrats tend to be true believers in government. They like bureaucracy. They like their positions of power. So they're not as individualistic. They're a little bit more team-oriented. And I disagree with something you said earlier. I think the Democrats push their agenda in lockstep much better than the Republicans. Unfortunately, it's a bad agenda. Margaret Thatcher talked about this in Great Britain. She said the liberals would come into power and they would move the culture 3 clicks to the right, to the left, excuse me. The conservatives would then win an election and they would hold their position. Then they would lose. The liberals would come in. They'd do 3 more clicks. Well, she moved it to the right, and the country went ballistic with her for a while. She was enormously successful, but it was a hard slog. That's where we are. We've been moving to the left since John Kennedy, and somebody's going to have to come along and move us back to the right, or at least get to the center.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a bloodbath, as Trump said, not physically, but.
Yeah. The rhetoric, I think, should stop on both sides.
Yeah.
You know, and you know what? If the Democrats are better at walking in lockstep, that's a problem for the Republican Party to fix.
Yeah.
If you can identify what your adversary is doing better, don't bitch about what they're doing. Improve your own shit.
I've been in some think tanks with a lot of conservatives.
Are you actually in a tank?
No.
God damn it.
Just a room. But everybody, when I've participated in those with conservatives, the guy to my left and my right both thought they were the smartest guy in the room.
That's so
and they were both
dangerous.
wrong because I was.
Of course.
And if they would just do if you would just do it the way I say, everything will be fine. Let me be in charge. And we don't work together well because we're all individualistic. We've all had some level of success in the private sector, and just you guys shut up and listen. Follow me. Too many leaders. And so I don't know how you fix it, but it can be fixed. So you look at the founding fathers, and they fought like cats and dogs, but the other thing, too, is we're such a trite culture. Most people don't read. I'll take it back to my book. When I wrote this, I had a target audience and a goal. I wanted to write a book that men would enjoy reading because men have almost completely stopped reading.
Really?
They stare at their phones.
I love reading. Do you mean even reading on phones?
No. Well, they may read on phones, but they read.
It's a horrible medium to read on because the goddamn words are so small.
Let me rephrase it another way. I follow marketing trends for books. 82% of the people that walk through the doors of a bookstore are female.
Really?
Yes. Men have largely stopped reading. I've got theories as to why that is, but I wanted to write something that men would really enjoy. I've had at least, by now, probably 200 messages from guys that I don't know, a few of the guys I did know, that said something very similar to this. I hadn't read a novel in 20 years. I read yours in 3 days. One of my favorites was a guy called me Colonel Paul Longrear. Have you ever come across him? He was a former Green Beret in Vietnam.
I can't say I have.
He did a lot of Halo training for special forces and stuff. He called me. I didn't know him, but I had sold him a book that had a business card in it, or maybe given it to him. I don't remember if I gave it to him or sold it to him, but I actually met him before my parents' funeral. I went to get breakfast somewhere, and I overheard him talking about Vietnam. And I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I just want to give you this book. He didn't really want it. So he calls me about 3 weeks later. He said, "Sir, is this Chris Gates, the author?" I said, "Yes, I don't know who it is."
Yeah.
And he says, "Sir, this is Colonel Paul Longrear. Sir, your book is out-damn standing." He said,
I like it. It's very Green Beret-ish.
Yeah. He said, "I didn't want to read the book. I picked up the book to just thumb through it and see what it was about." He said, "Sir, I read 150 pages in one sitting. I've never done that in my life."
Yeah, it's interesting that men are stopping reading. I've read almost every book over behind the camera that's pointed at me. People can't see this in the studio. There's a bookshelf, and I keep the books from all the authors. I love reading. I've always loved reading.
I have too.
I struggle with reading on electronics. I can do it, but my retention is less.
Yeah, I agree.
Which could also be from the multiple times I've been hit in the head and the fact that I entered into life as an idiot. But I enjoy books.
Yeah.
That sucks to hear that. I think they help bend your beliefs. They help expand your mind.
Yeah.
Forces you to confront the fact that your vocabulary sucks.
And you were talking about Weinstein earlier. He said something a couple of weeks ago on another podcast. He said, we have been robbed of the sacred because everything's a tweet. Everything's attention spans are so short now. And when I try to sell people books, the number one answer I get, women and men, and by the way, women have been great. They've loved this book too. And we can talk about why I think that is. But they say, oh, they'll back up. Like you're putting a fire poker near them. I don't have time to read. Everybody thinks they're so much busier than they really are.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of smartphones. We've got so much input, constant, that we're like, oh, man, I don't have time to read. I can read this book, or I could read any book on your shelf if I really sat down and in 6-8 hours.
Well, occupied and busy are two different things.
Bingo.
Also, addicted and busy are two very different things. Just because you're physically doing something doesn't mean you're doing something meaningful.
Yeah. And I've read a ton. We were talking earlier about my childhood. I moved so much.
I was going to ask you, why did you move 43 times?
It's crazy. My dad, I lost both my parents, by the way, in January of this year within 5 days of each other.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
How did they pass so close to each other?
They both had a form of Alzheimer's.
Okay.
And it was really weird. My mom, hers reached a point where her legs wouldn't do what the brain was telling them to do. So she fell several times in one day. The day she was falling, my wife was getting her first radiation treatment for surgery for cancer in Nashville. So I couldn't go be with her.
Yeah.
But she got bedridden. And when she got bedridden, my dad rallied and started wanting to do a lot of things for her. He went outside and built a wheelchair ramp because he said, your mom's going to be in a wheelchair now. I want her to have a ramp. And he burned himself out, I think. And he died before she did.
How cognitively were they at the end? Alzheimer's is a gnarly one.
She was really having a hard time with reality.
Yeah.
He was not that far gone, but I'll tell you one cute one. I took him for a picnic October before they died in January. Of course, I had no idea they were that close.
Yeah.
And they were really shuffling, and I had to help them to the picnic table. And my mom said, when you went in there to get the food, you're never going to guess who stuck his head in the car window. And I said, who? She said, James Garner from the Rockford Files. And I said, oh, really? And my dad, whenever my mom would go off on one of those tangents, he'd say, come on, Judas H., you're talking nonsense. Well, that time he said, what'd he say? And then I knew, okay, he's fading from me too. And then they had a 10-minute conversation about her conversation with James Garner that didn't really happen.
All right. I'm going to ask you something that most people, they're not going to understand. Is there a portion of Alzheimer's that if you had it, maybe it is the way to go because it's so entertaining on the way out?
I wrote an article.
Are you living your best life every day because everything is new?
They had so much fun on that picnic.
That is what I'm saying.
Yeah. They wanted to go in their pajamas, so by golly, we went in their pajamas, and they sat at a picnic table. They talked to everybody that went by. They waved at everybody. The food in my parents' analysis was the best meal they'd ever had in their life. It was the ambrosia of the gods.
And you probably could have had that multiple days and had that experience. Yeah. If my father gets Alzheimer's, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to fuck with him. I'm going to take changes of clothes over to his house and like use the bathroom and come out in a different outfit, Michael, and just repeat the same. He won't repeat the conversation. I'll just repeat the conversation several times and blame it. I'll gaslight him.
Yeah.
I mean, and
then there's the sad part too. The down days are just brutal.
I can only imagine.
And
obviously there's nothing actually funny about Alzheimer's, but I have thought about it. I mean,
they had some good times.
Well,
I've got a video of my mom dancing to the Bee Gees at 86 years old, and she is putting on a show.
Yeah. I mean, the end is coming for us all. Nobody wants to see that coming. Would it almost be better to be at the precipice of that and not realize it?
I think in a way it was a blessing to them that they went abruptly.
Yeah. Because
they were just getting to the really ugly stages when they both went. Why did we even start talking about that? I was saying
you moved around 43 times.
Moved around 43 times. So my dad was in the military.
Okay.
And stationed at Fort Benning. He met my mom in Columbus, Georgia. My grandfather, who's the main character of my book, said, I want you to, if you're going to marry my daughter, I would like you to get out of the military because I don't want to have to move a lot. So my dad became a banker. Well, he had a really rough upbringing, and he had some anger management issues. In the banking business, punching a customer, not good.
I actually don't know a business where that is good, unless you're an MMA fighter.
He had a couple incidents like that, and we ended up changing jobs. Some of the times it wasn't his fault. Some of the times there were slime. He was very honorable. He had a lot of street smarts. He only had an 8th grade education, but he went to LSU banking school, worked his way through. He was a really smart guy. Had good instincts, and there were a lot of slimy guys in the banking business before the big savings and loan scandal. He saw that coming, and he was trying to get guys to change their ways, and so they'd get pissed off at him, and he'd get run off that way. Or sometimes he was just chasing the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He wanted to be a bank president, so he kept switching jobs for that. It was crazy. So as a kid, you're not analyzing all that. You're just thinking, crap, I got to go to another new school. So when I got to a new playground, I was underweight. I had been really sick as a kid, kind of a wimpy little nerd. I realized if I tell kids stories, I can make friends. And then I did a lot of stand-up comedy on the playground too, anything to keep from getting my ass kicked. And I got really good at it. And so by the time I was 9th grade, I was a really good storyteller, and I started writing stories. And I had an English teacher named Miss Mavis Johnson. She held me after class one day. I was the class clown. And she said, Skates, everybody else leave. You stay here. So I went back
I've been
there.
a part of these conversations a few times myself.
And Miss Mavis, she was Teacher of the Year for the state of Georgia multiple times, and very no-nonsense, excellent teacher. And she said, Skates, you've got real talent. She said, you could be a writer if you'll quit clowning around and take your studies seriously. I didn't at that time, but I'm 61 years old, and I'm telling you about that. Yeah. By the way, I've got a picture of Miss Mavis reading my first novel in the nursing home.
That's awesome.
So she knew what an influence she had on me. And then I had a couple of college professors that really tried to get me to become a writer. And I just, as I said, I didn't think it was practical, so I went into the whole chemistry thing. But
you got to it, which brings us full circle. Tell me about the book.
So my grandfather was the most important male influence in my life. I worship the man. He taught me my love for hunting, the outdoors. He grew up much closer to a pioneer's upbringing than a modern day person's. He was born in 1902. He lived in a little community called Evanston, Florida. His dad, he had 5 sisters, so there were 6 children in the family, and his mother, who was a gorgeous woman, even in those old-timey photographs, her beauty jumps out at you. She died when my grandfather was 2 in childbirth. And so
your grandfather was the youngest?
Yeah. And then the baby died when she was so he was 6 or 7, and he was already coon hunting with a lantern and a bat, basically.
Same as 6 and 7-year-olds all throughout the U.S. now.
Quick aside, we were watching a nature show when I was an adult, and they were talking about alligators in Florida. And I always called him Pop. I said, Pop, didn't you tell me you would chase your coon dogs all night when you were 6 or 7? And he said, yeah. I said, well, with all the alligators and snakes down there, did you wear snake boots? And he goes, snake boots? He said, boy, I didn't own a pair of shoes till I was 12 years old. And
it's a different world.
I said, weren't you worried about alligators and snakes? He goes, nah. He said, I probably should have been. He said, but I didn't have good sense. I was half wild.
And 6.
And that part about him saying I was half wild was very profound. He was. But his dad took him duck hunting at 7. And he gave him a Parker double-barrel shotgun with rabbit ear hammers. He could barely hold it up, but he managed to kill 3 ducks. I think he had outstanding hand-eye coordination just naturally. And his dad was on a different island in this waterway in Florida. His dad comes back a couple hours later. Boy, I heard you use 3 shells. How many ducks you kill? I think he shot 4 times, killed 3 ducks. He said.
So hold on. At the age of 7, he was alone with the rifle.
Yeah.
Oh,
with the
of course. Why wouldn't he be?
And he said, Papa, I killed 3 ducks. And his dad said, good. I don't got to hunt anymore. And he never hunted again the rest of his life because it was just another chore for him. He was trying to get meat for his kids.
Yeah, he was trying to feed his family.
And so my grandfather was basically a professional hunter from the age of 7. And so by the time he found out that they were hiring guys to go find moonshine stills in the woods, he was like, throw me in that briar patch.
Because he was born and raised in those woods, for lack of a better term.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he hired into the revenue department, as near as I can tell, in 1938. He tried professional baseball. He loved baseball. He was a good first baseman. He tried to make it, didn't. He was in Atlanta for a while with some of the minor leagues. And then he tried a couple of salesman's jobs. Anyway, he found out about the revenue department, became a revenue agent, and was good at it really quickly. And moonshine was it was the drug of choice in the United States in that time. And I don't know 100% why, but in the 40s, the price of moonshine skyrocketed, partly because of the sugar rations for World War II. So sugar was more expensive. It was more expensive to get moonshine. But I also think there was an element of the southeastern United States was the Bible Belt, and you couldn't just have a liquor store. So people wanted to drink, it was going to be moonshine. In 1940, and I found this in an old newspaper clipping, a gallon of moonshine was $20.
What is that equivalent to today?
I don't know.
That's got to be hundreds.
Yeah. I'll give you some perspective. My grandfather's annual salary as a revenue agent was $2,300 a year. So these moonshiners were making more in a week than he was making in a year.
Yeah.
Or at least in a month.
It just goes to show that the government's never really paid shit.
Yeah. So let me tell you what inspired me to write the story, though, and then we'll get back to the story. 12 years old, I'm sitting with my grandfather. I was constantly in his shadow. He taught me hunting, fishing. He was infinitely better at all of it than I'll ever be. But we were watching the Andy Griffith Show. That was our ritual. Go hunting in the morning, come in. My grandmother would have this massive Southern lunch, and then we'd watch Andy Griffith. So a character came on named Rafe Hollister. He was only on about 6 episodes, had an amazing baritone voice. But Rafe, in this episode, was a Mayberry moonshiner. And Otis was going to buy some moonshine from him, and it's just a bunch of comedy around that. And all of a sudden, my grandfather got really irritated, and he just smacked the TV off. And I said, Pop, what are you doing? Aren't we going to finish the show? And I looked up, and his chin was quivering, and there were tears coming down his cheeks. I'd never seen him cry. My dad was really a hard guy, but my grandfather was a tough guy, too. And he said, it wasn't like that, boy. He said, there was nothing funny about the moonshine business.
Well, I bet it was cutthroat.
He said, you think you've seen a child cry or heard a child cry? He said, wait till you take their daddy out of some ditch somewhere. He's sick unto death off a bad moonshine. And you take him to some little shack. He said, you don't even know poverty. He said, people were so poor in the South back in the 30s and 40s. And he said, you take them to a shack, and their children are running around out in the yard. Their bellies are distended from hunger. They've barely got any clothes to wear. And Daddy just spent the grocery money on a gallon of moonshine. He said, those little children would hold onto my leg and wail. He says, it's a cry you'd never get out of your mind. And then he just started repeating, I couldn't help them all. I couldn't help them all. And then he just started sobbing. He and my grandmother had been married about 60 years at that time, and they fought like cats and dogs. But she, in that moment, she pushed an ottoman over and took his hands and just held his hands, and he cried for probably 5 minutes. And I knew then, I wasn't even a writer. I said, somehow I got to tell this story. So he was an unapologetic crusader against moonshine stills. And I was very, very blessed. I found a moonshiner that my grandfather arrested in 1946. I found him in a nursing home in Panama City Beach, Florida. Clear-minded, great memory, a gold mine of information about my grandfather. When I called him, I said, did you know a revenue agent? My grandfather was C.E. Miller. People called him Kid. I said, did you know a revenue agent named C.E. Miller? He said, I didn't just know that son of a bitch. He's the one that took me to jail. And I just got chill bumps because then I had a living witness. And a couple things that he told me a lot, and I've got a lot of notes, but the things that really have stuck with me, he said, your grandfather was the only man I ever met that I would call fearless. He said, you got to understand. He said, somebody from your generation, you can't fathom how big the woods were in the South back then. He said, we were miles from any road. We all had a gun, and we would have shot your grandpa as soon as looked at him. But he said, your grandfather was fearless, and he was relentless. And he said, your grandfather chased me through the woods one night for 12 miles. And he said, he didn't catch me that night, but he eventually caught me. And he said, he pretty well single-handedly shut down the liquor business in the western region of Georgia. And I that was just amazing because my grandfather was very modest. You had to pull everything out of him.
Yeah.
And to hear somebody on the other side of the law brag on him like that. And then the other guy that I was able to find was a revenue agent. I didn't know if he would have known my grandfather or not. I just knew he was in the same time period. Got him on the phone. He was 86, also clear memory. Both these men have passed away now. But he said, your grandfather was my training officer. And he said, he took me on the first raid I ever went on, and it was like I was going to play baseball with Babe Ruth. He was just a legend already. Yeah. So they told me a lot. My grandfather told me a lot. When we'd be hunting, we'd go by a creek, and he'd say, I remember busting a still up this creek in 38, and he'd tell me the story, you know. He loves talking about the tracking and all that. When it got to the violence, he stopped talking. My uncle was 92 when I started writing this manuscript. He was in the Navy in World War II most of the time when the stuff that happened in my book was going on, but he came home on leave, and I interviewed him. He's now passed away. Of course, I had my mother. She was a little girl during all this. But he said, your grandfather, my daddy took me, he said, I want you to come sit in the car with me. He said, I want you to get out no matter what happens. But I got to question the guy. He's a pretty bad old boy. And so he said, I thought I had ridden every back road in that county because all he did was race cars and drove before he got in the Navy. And he said, but my daddy took me somewhere that night. We were so far back in the boonies, I have no idea where we were. And he said he started questioning this guy, and the guy really got belligerent with him. And he said all of a sudden my dad backhanded him and knocked him down. And then the guy had a knife sticking in a stump where he was cleaning fish. This is a scene in my book now, by the way. And he yanked the knife out, and he came at my dad, and my dad drew his pistol and cocked it, and he said, it'll be the last step you ever take. That line went in the book.
Yeah, that's a pretty good line.
And I thought, man, that's good. I wish I'd thought of that one. So when I was older, and when I came along and I got into my teens, I said, Pop, why don't you stay in law enforcement? And he said, back when I was doing the job, you could make a man respect the badge. He said, the way these guys got to do it now, he said, that's how you get dead. That's the way he said it.
It is a different world and a different environment for sure. Did he ever drink?
No, he hated alcohol.
I was going to ask if it was he just was passionate about his job or he disliked alcohol in
He
general.
was very passionate about it. Something happened to him as a boy, and I don't want to say it because it's in the book, that drove him.
Okay. Fair enough. And that I don't think that's an uncommon story.
Yeah.
Whether alcohol or anything else, something moving young in life that resets your trajectory.
Right.
Okay.
And he was an unbelievable shot. We were fishing one time, and he had his service pistol with. He just had a Smith & Wesson revolver. And he said, boy, you see that turtle over there? This thing was 75 yards. I said, yeah. He said, you believe I can hit him in the head with this pistol? I said, no way. And he decapitated the turtle.
I mean, that's not very nice to the turtle.
Yeah, that's the only time I saw him actually shoot the pistol. But he was just an incredible shot. We quail hunted a lot together. He could kill 3 on the rise pretty regularly.
Some people, when it comes to that tool, it becomes an extension of who they are.
And he was very proud of the fact that he never shot anybody.
Yeah.
And he used his skill as a tool so that he wouldn't have to.
Yeah. I think one of the most powerful tools for law enforcement is their ability to use their mouth and de-escalate.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff you see, and of course, there's millions upon millions of police interactions not every single day, but throughout the totality of a year. And the shit ones, more often than not, make it onto the internet. But even in a lot of those, you could see where some de-escalation, a little bit of different training, it would drastically change the outcome.
And the moonshiner told me, he reiterated something my grandfather had told me. He was very respectable of the people he arrested. If they had kids, and the moonshiner confirmed this, he said he would, if a guy had children, he'd say, listen, you're busted. Go home for 30 days. Make sure your kids are taken care of. Meet me at the jail 30 days from now or the courthouse or whatever. And he said, I don't know of any person that ever stood him up. They were so appreciative. And these guys, a lot of them weren't hardcore criminals. Some of them were, but a lot of them weren't hardcore criminals.
Yeah.
Now, one hardcore criminal he came across, and it's a central theme of the book. There's 2 major cases in the book, the case of the Upson County Liquor Gang and the case of John Wallace. John Wallace was like a moonshine kingpin. He had guys working for him. He had a lot of stills. He was actually selling some of his liquor to Capone in Chicago. I just messed up part of the book, but anyway.
You didn't mess it up. Trust me, people will still read it.
Yeah. So he, in 1948, he murdered my grandfather's informant, or a guy that my grandfather was trying to get to be an informant, in front of a restaurant full of people in broad daylight. He pistol whipped him to death. That murder was made into a best-selling novel in the 70s called Murder in Coweta County, then made into a made-for-TV movie called Murder in Coweta County. And Johnny Cash played the sheriff. Johnny Cash read the book, loved it, and wanted to make the movie. You know about how good an actor Johnny Cash was. But guess who played the killer?
Elvis Presley.
Andy Griffith. It's the only time Andy ever played a killer.
Really?
And he's quite good at it. You can find the whole movie on YouTube, by the way.
Okay.
But I was watching, the book came out and I devoured it. I read it in one day. I was like 12. And my grandfather was in the den sweeping. I was staying with him for the summer, which I did every summer if I could. And he hit me with the broom on the leg. He said, "Boy, what are you reading that crap for?" And I said, "Pop, this book is awesome. You're in this book." And he said, "That lady don't know nothing." He said, "Come here." So he took me back in his room, and he had a green metal strongbox. I've got it in my writing office now. He opened it up. It was full of his official papers that he'd saved. Rummaged around through there, and he pulled out a handwritten note. It said, "Agent Miller, it is urgent that we speak. Meet me at my barn at midnight. Come alone. Signed, John Wallace."
Wow.
So that's how my story starts. So he was intimately involved in trying to get John Wallace for moonshine, and he was wanting the victim, a guy named Wilson Turner, to be his informant, and all of a sudden Wilson Turner comes up missing. And that, my grandfather took that personally, that he was afraid he had put this guy in danger.
Yeah.
So he was integral in the conviction of John Wallace. The case of John Wallace is the biggest murder investigation in Georgia history to this day by the number of law enforcement officials that were involved.
Interesting.
Because he hid the body so well, they couldn't find it. Georgia is a corpus delicti state. No body, no murder.
Really?
They could not convict him if they didn't find the body. My grandfather found the body.
Is it still that way in that state?
I don't know. It was in 1948.
I feel that's like a little bit of a loophole.
Here's what's great about fiction. Those two cases in real life happened. One happened in 46. The other one happened in 48.
Yeah.
I moved them both into 46.
Well, that's the purview of the author.
Yeah, because I thought it made it really cool that World War II had just ended and guys were coming home.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of metaphor in the book about that. But also it allowed me to have both investigations going simultaneously. It makes the book really fast paced.
Yeah.
But
is it available on Amazon?
Yeah, I've got it paperback, I've got Kindle, and I've got an audiobook. I had so much fun producing the audiobook.
Whose voice?
A guy named Gary Barboza, voice actor. I didn't know any voice actors. I'm on Twitter messing around one day, and a friend, I didn't know Gary Barboza. I didn't follow him. Somebody retweeted him. He said, "Hey, guys, I just cut a new movie trailer. Check it out." And I was like, "What does he mean cut it? Is he a cameraman or something?" So I'll listen to the trailer. It was really cool. And he's got this voice that's like, we can play a sample if you want. FBI.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, yeah.
And so I was like, man, he would make a great guy to do an audiobook. So I just tweeted at him. I didn't think he'd see it or respond. In 5 minutes, he followed me. And then he said, I followed him back, and he direct messaged me. He said, "Here's my phone number. Give me a call. I've always wanted to do an audiobook."
That's awesome.
He ended up being a great guy. We're friends now. He was excellent at his job. He nails the Southern accent. Can you look on my Amazon page and see if you can find the audio sample?
So this book is in the can. You got the audio book done. We'll pull up the audio. But the question is now, what do you write next?
I'm working on a sequel to this.
Okay.
Because he has so many more. As I researched and learned more about other cases he was involved in, I was like, man, I could do 3 books. But I also want to write a prequel. I want to write about his childhood as a professional hunter.
Yeah.
He grew up at Evanston, Florida, is a land lost in time. And it's still just like it was when he was a boy. So I want to write about his boyhood.
Let's hear it, Michael.
I could feel the hostility coming from Wallace.
This is the
Wasn't
meeting.
just fishing for information. There was something more here. Something that ran deep. I should have explored that, but right now I was angry because Wallace
I like it.
assumed
It's
I
good.
was bidding.
I like it.
So
you'll branch this out. This will be a tree. It'll branch out. You're going to go and plant some other trees that you can branch out off of?
Yeah, my first 2 books were actually biblical fiction. I wrote a bunch of short stories, got them all published, and at that time, writing for me was like fishing. Hey, I got some short stories published. I wonder if I could get a technical article published on chemistry. So I got about 5 of those published. Well, I wonder if I could do a hunting article. So I did a bunch of hunting articles. And I would kind of fall out of love with it. Once I had done it, it was like, okay, I accomplished it. I want to do something
The
else.
novelty was gone.
Yeah, so around 2003, I was like, I want to try to write a novel. And I started this story here. Total writer's block. I wrote the first page, which is, by the way, is the same as the first page of chapter 1 to this day. I kept that page for 10 years, but I ended up using it. But I couldn't get anywhere with it. I don't know, the timing wasn't right, the universe, whatever. So by then I had a bunch of outdoor articles published. So I was speaking at a men's wild game supper at a church. And a guy that I knew came up to me and he said, "Hey, I love your writing and your articles." He said, "I've had the idea for a novel for 30 years, but I'm not a writer. I'm never going to write it. Would you?" And he said, "I've written the first sentence and I've got on a little piece of paper in my wallet." He said, "Would you take a look at it and see if you think it could be a book?" I said, "Well, what's the concept?" He said, "Noah and the Ark." But he said, everything we see on Noah is he's got his arm around a giraffe. They're singing little happy songs. It's a pop-up book, and it's all fun and games. He said, but if it was a real event, it was literally the most terrifying event in human history. I said, "You got my attention. What's the sentence?" He said, "We covered our ears to block out the screams." And I said, "I'm going to write your book." He had me. He had me. So I wrote a book called The Rain, a story of Noah and the Ark, and I tried to make it very realistic. It's a little gritty, and I tried to put the reader on the ark for a year. Yeah. And I figure out how they dealt with some of the problems that they would have had with the animals.
Yeah, that would not have been a pleasure cruise.
Yeah, no, heck no. So then I ended up writing a sequel to that called The Tower, about the Tower of Babel, because I learned that Noah's grandson built the Tower of Babel in rebellion when Noah was still alive. So I was like, wow, how'd that make Noah feel? So the Tower is about that. Then I wrote Going Green, the political thriller, because I wanted to get back at the EPA. And then I really wanted to alert the public to what I thought was going on, and it turned out I was right. And then Moonshine Over Georgia, I've got a sequel I'm working on. I've got a prequel, but all my life I've wanted to write my life story, moving 43 times, becoming a storyteller. Yeah. My dad could be pretty rough on me. And I don't want to, nobody wants to hear about, "Oh, I had cancer, boo-hoo." No, I want it to be, look what I overcame. You're going to overcome your thing too. That's what the book is. And I've actually finished the rough draft of that. So that'll be my next book. I hope I have it out by January.
Hell yeah. What do you have planned for your rest of your time here in Montana? Because I know you guys drove here.
Yeah.
It's a short drive from where you live. So
we planned this trip in 2019, and the governor didn't get reelected, so I had to start a new job, so we canceled. 2020, I got leukemia. We canceled. So me and my bone marrow donor are out here living the dream, and we are having a blast. I trout fished yesterday on the Flathead. Yep. Caught 10. We've been doing a bunch of hikes. So we're going to do several more hikes. We want to do the Grinnell Glacier, but I don't know if I got the endurance yet. We're going to see how it goes. We're going to do some shorter hikes the next couple of days. Yeah. We're doing the Red Bus Tour because we just want to do the whole Going to the Sun Road.
It's a great road.
And so, yeah, several more hikes. And we're going to try to go home through the Grand Tetons.
That's a hell of a trip.
Is it? Is that too far?
No, I mean, it's spectacular.
Oh, good.
I'm liking the journey you've loaded up for yourself.
We drove out here because A, I haven't sold enough books. I can't afford a plane ticket. But B, I just wanted to see the other states. Yeah. And so we drove through. It was awesome. I think it's going to kind of suck going back because now we've seen them. So we want to do the Grand Tetons on the way back so we see something different.
Which state did you like the least?
Parts of South Dakota got really boring.
It's okay to say the Dakotas if you want to.
Yeah, South Dakota got really boring. I actually guided turkey hunters. 94 bucket list item. I was a turkey hunting guide in the South Dakota prairies for 3 weeks.
Okay.
And so I'd seen South Dakota before, but not the whole thing. And we did stop at Mount Rushmore. Yep. We did that.
Smaller than people think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I really wanted to do Little Bighorn, but we needed to get moving. So yeah, it's been great so far. We've had really good weather. We did a raft trip yesterday, whitewater. It wasn't real aggressive whitewater, but it was fun.
It's a little bit late in the season for
you. But here I am, me and my son,
that's awesome.
It's really good.
Well, I mean, what do you want to leave people with? We've been at it for over 2 hours at this point. I want to get you out to some ribs.
Yeah.
And I'm sure your son would probably want some too.
All I ask is, if each person listening to my voice would buy 35 copies of my book.
That's a reasonable ask. It really is.
And if they don't, I will probably die of cancer. No.
I mean, I think that's one of the better sales pitches I've ever heard.
Go buy the book.
The goal is I want to make enough money off my books to retire and just write books. I've got so many more stories. I've got a lot of stories that I haven't even got out of the fledgling stages yet that I would love to write. And when I write a story, and I think you'll see this when you read it, and you can look at my reviews on Amazon, you're going to come away with a great feeling. You're going to say, I'm really glad I read that. I had a 90-year-old woman come to one of my book signings this is going to sound like I made it up, with a broken leg. She had a cast on her leg. Her grandsons carried her into the book signing fireman style. And they said, would you be able to come around and speak to my grandmother? I had some people that I was signing for, but I was like, absolutely. So I go over there and talk to her. The sweet little lady just grabbed both my hands, and she was crying. And she said, I've read your book. She had a dog-eared copy with her she wanted me to sign. And she said, I just had to come here. I told my grandsons, whatever you got to do, get me up there to meet this man. I want to tell him what this book meant to me. I didn't know she was a part of my past, but the English teacher I told you about, it was my English teacher's best friend. She didn't know that had been my English teacher. She just found the book. But I asked her later, I ended up getting her number, and I called her. I said, why did it mean so much to you? And I said, did you have some connection to history? She said, I was aware of the case just because of George history, but no, the love for your grandfather leaped off every page. And it really moved me. And I've had so many connections. I had a black lady. There's a very prominent black character in my book that was a real person that was completely left out of murder in Coweta County. It was a very heroic person. I had a black lady approach me at a book signing, and she grabbed me and hugged me, and she was crying. And she said, you were the first one to tell the truth. She said, I knew him, and you told his story so well. And then she just faded off into the crowd. So it's unreal. This thing happened 80 years ago. Connections with readers is so gratifying. I would keep writing books if I never sold another one. But Becky told me something that Ed Meese told her. Ed Meese, I think, was Secretary of State for Reagan. He said, when you have created something good and you're putting good out into the universe and you ask a person to come alongside you, they're not doing you a favor. You're doing them a favor. So if I sell somebody a book that enriches them because they read it, they're not doing me a favor by buying the book. It's $20. You'll pay $20 for a cup of coffee. I'm trying to give you something, and it's worthwhile. There is a place for literature in our culture, and we're losing it. And I want to write good literature, and I'm pretty darn good at it. You let me know what you think when you read it.
I mean, I look forward to reading it. For people who do read it and they love it, do you do social media? Is there a way people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm not as good on the social media front. I've done that. I had a website. I had all that. And right now, there's only so much time. I'm trying to beat cancer. I'm working a full-time job. I'm writing books. I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing my own marketing. So I do have a Twitter. They're welcome to reach out to me, Chris Gates. It's not a code name. I'm on Facebook, Chris Gates. But I love doing book signings. I love speaking about the book. You and I just scratched the surface of some of the backstories I've got. I've got some great moonshine raid stories that aren't even in the book that are just outstanding, real raids. And so I love speaking. I love speaking to book clubs. I've gotten to do that several times, and it's very rewarding for me. And then I'll bring books and sell them or whatever. But the best way they can help is just go to Amazon and buy a book.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair
And
enough.
if you're too busy to read a book, get the audio and listen to it on your commute.
I dig it.
And I get great reviews on that too. Gary did such a good job, and people say I couldn't stop listening. So,
well, on that note, let's get you some ribs, man.
Great, thank you.
You game? All right, thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Of course, my pleasure.